I call to order this board meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District number 48 Governing Board. Today is Tuesday, June 14th. The time is 6 p.m. Let's get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. Board Member Vice President Dr. Hartwells.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dr. Hartwells. Could have a roll call vote, starting with my far right.
Zach Lindsay.
Libby Hartwells.
Julie Sanowski.
Young.
And we have Board Member Greenberg in the cloud. We do have a quorum, and I ask that we have a motion to approve the agenda as proposed.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes 4-0. Thank you. We will move on to item number 3, Superintendent's comments. Dr. Menzel.
Good evening, President Sanowski, Vice President Hartwells, and governing board members. Tonight we have a very lengthy agenda, so I will keep my comments brief. I would like to acknowledge that tonight will be the last meeting for a couple of our senior leadership team members. Dr. Guerin and Dr. Hagigat will be moving on to superintendencies, and so they will not be at our June 28th meeting, and also our general counsel is moving on, so I just want to express my appreciation for the service that they've provided to Scottsdale Unified School District, and also Dr. Bowman's moving on as well, so we have several members that are departing our team, and we are excited about the new individuals who will be joining our team, but I just wanted to acknowledge them this evening. I also want to mention that I had the honor of participating in the ASBA conference with our board president and vice president at the end of last week, and then at the Arizona School Administrators Conference at the beginning of this week, which made for a very long weekend, but great learning opportunities and connecting with colleagues. One of the topics of discussion at both of those conferences related to the state of the budget, which we are still firmly parked in neutral at the present time. The good news is that the state has an unprecedented surplus of $5.3 billion. The bad news is the elected officials haven't figured a way to divvy up the pot in order to ensure schools are adequately funded to provide world-class education for our students. They have 16 days in which to get that work done, and so we'll continue to do what we can to advocate for a bipartisan education budget that recognizes the importance of investing in our children, ensuring that our staff are able to be compensated properly so that we can attract and retain top talent. And with that, I will conclude my comments.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. At this time, we will start the agenda for information and discussion items, with 4A being academic achievement update. Dr. Menzel, would you like to introduce Dr. Bachman?
I would. So as you know, the first in our strategic plan and the topic of discussion that drives us every day is ensuring that our students are achieving. We aspire to world class. We know we're not there in every way yet, but it's important to hold ourselves accountable for improved student achievement on an annual basis. And Dr. Bachman is here to review our data at the elementary and secondary level and kind of paint a picture of what happened during the course of the 21-22 school year.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. Good evening, board members. Dr. Menzel, Ms. Wagner. As Dr. Menzel just said, I'm here tonight to present to you an academic achievement update for the 21-22 school year. A brief review of the state tests the majority of our students took this spring is on the screen here. The biggest group of testers were our 3rd to 8th grade students who took the AASA, which is shorthand for Arizona's Academic Standards Assessment. This is the first year for that new test name. However, the content of the tests for our students was not a change from AZ Merit. The item types our students were exposed to on both assessments were the same. It was a name change only. Next up, we have the new Azsci Assessment, which was administered to our 5th, 8th, and 11th graders and covered science content. In high school, our 9th graders took the ACT Aspire for the first time. This is essentially a pre-ACT test that covers the same content areas as the ACT. And finally, our 11th graders took the ACT, which They've been taking district-wide in Scottsdale since 2018, but this is the first year the ACT is being used as the official Arizona state assessment. With the exception of Azsci, I will be sharing with you tonight the preliminary results of the other 3 assessments on this slide. Official score released by the State Department of Education will take place in August or September, and I'll be able to share Azsci and official results with you this fall. Also in the fall, after the official release of scores, I'll be able to share out comparison to our other Valley school districts like I did last October. On the next few slides, I'll be sharing our data trends on various assessments. In talking with teachers and principals around SUSD, I've heard common themes arise in relation to the 21-22 school year. First, this continued to be a very challenging years in terms of the pandemic impact on student and staff attendance. While we were grateful to be open to in-person learning all year, we also had more students than pre-pandemic who were chronically absent for various reasons. Second, the impact of having large numbers of our teachers out led our district office staff to spend more time providing vital substitute teaching services, which took away from their time to provide professional development and support to our teachers. A universal theme across all of us is a hope for a 21-23 school year substantially less impacted by the pandemic of the past few years. So let's look at our AASA preliminary data. This is our English language arts data. You are seeing a comparison of Scottsdale scores to state level scores for students testing as proficient and highly proficient. In other words, these are the percentage of students who pass the test. In all areas, Scottsdale students outperform the state averages by a substantial amount, with our 4th graders demonstrating the highest proficiency levels of our students on this ELA exam. Next, we take a look at our student performance by cohort from spring 2021 to spring 2022. So for each section, this is by grade level, their scores on the previous spring compared to the scores this spring. Our 2022 4th graders demonstrated the largest increase in scores over time. The biggest change was a downward trend from 5th to 6th grade in scores. In talking with my colleagues in teaching and learning, we are interested to look at what might be causing both the successes and the dips presented here. In my experience, the change in schools between elementary and middle from 5th to 6th grade does play a part in this decline. You'll notice that our last year's 6th grade cohort also passed the test at a 53% rate and now have regained that momentum to an increase to 58% passing as 7th graders. We also need to look at our English language arts curriculum implementation fidelity in middle school. This was a new curriculum this year. Jonna Wallace, the secondary English language arts coach, is working with teachers on updating our middle school English benchmark tests to be better aligned to our curriculum maps, to ultimately support our learners with an assessment experience that will serve as good practice before they take the AASA again next spring. Switching now to our preliminary math data across grade levels 3 through 8. Our math scores are substantially higher than those of the state averages, with our 3rd grade math in particular being a highlight here. Overall, our 3rd grade math and English and language arts scores were both higher than they were in 2021, which is a good starting point for our learners as they progress through our schools. Here on this slide, we take a look at our student performance by cohort from spring 21 to spring 2022 in English language arts. Our 2022, I'm looking at math. Hold, please. So you can see again our transition between grade levels from 3rd to 4th grade. We held steady in the elementary grades with an increase from 4th to 5th grade in spring 22 for our 5th graders. We again see that dip in middle school math. Between coming from 5th to 6th grade, we are seeing that change down and a decrease, and we are also seeing a change in the 7th and 8th grades. We want to continue to look at what's happening there and why that's happening with our students. Again, this is the 2nd year of our math adoption, and I know Dr. Dawes has been working and looking at our math implementation as well, and so we need to continue to evaluate what's going on there. In looking at our ACT Aspire results, we are lucky enough to have national and state comparisons for these test scores. These are our 9th graders that took this test. And what you can see here is that Scottsdale is outperforming not only the state on this assessment, but also the nation. These scores demonstrate the percentage of our students on track for college success in each of the 4 content areas. We see that we match the nation in the science level, but we outperform in English, reading, and math on this test for the nation. Here are ACT grade 11 results from the spring testing. There are 5 scores presented, 1 for each of the subject areas and an overall composite score. These scores are out of a range of 1 to 36. You can see that Scottsdale scores are higher than the state and national comparisons across all areas. The national comparisons presented here is from last fall. This will be updated again this coming fall. That is when the ACT releases their national comparisons. Looking at our ACT grade 11 student comparison, spring 21 to spring 2022, this is our different groups of students. Our students only take the ACT one time. So this is looking at 11th graders compared to 11th graders this last year compared to 11th graders this year. You can see that we saw increases in the composite, math, and English scores over the year and slight decreases in science and reading. Diving deeper into our ACT grade 11 composite scores, here are the results by district and each high school. I want to take a minute to point out that we tested, number of students tested during each point in time, which is the number in parentheses. You can see that we tested more students during the spring of 2022 at every campus. This is likely due to our students who chose to remain online for school all last spring, not choosing to come in to take the ACT. At 3 of our campuses, we saw an increase in composite scores from the 2021 cohort to the 2022 cohort. At 2 campuses, we saw a decline. Schools with an asterisk are where the difference in composite scores between the 2 cohorts were statistically significant. So statistical significance testing is used to determine if the differences between 2 variables is greater than can be attributed to chance. In other words, is the difference between 2 sets of test scores greater than could be attributed to chance and potentially indicate that the education the students engaged in had an impact on their performance? There are a variety of types of statistical tests that can be conducted depending on the nature of what is being studied. I won't get too deep into the details, but in this example, I use what is called an independent samples t-test to evaluate the individual student test scores on the 2 cohorts through a statistical program. I evaluated all the composite score differences by campus, and the changes were statistically significant in Coronado and Saguaro. The changes at the other campuses and for the district overall were not statistically significant. Moving on to our district assessment results. I want to update you on the final progression of our students in elementary school on FastBridge in English and math, and our middle schoolers on the iReady math assessments. We give these assessments 3 times a year. Looking at our FastBridge test results for English language arts, we saw an increase from fall to spring performance in all grade levels, with the exception of 4th grade. In reviewing these results with Diane Murphy, our elementary English instructional coach, she reminded me that this was the first year of the assessment, and the 4th graders tested substantially higher in the fall than the students in the other grade levels. You can see here that they tested at 78% in the fall, while the rest of our grade levels were in the 60s. Well, so we're both kind of curious if this is an anomaly in the data. We'll know more when our students test again in August, when we have them come back and take this test the second time. We also heard from the teachers of our upper elementary grade levels that testing fatigue had set in by the end of the school year. These students that took the 3rd through 5th graders took the AASA in April, and then they took the FastBridge test in May. The testing calendar working group discussed how to time these assessments better within the calendar so our students can demonstrate their best effort. In terms of statistical significance, using a paired sample t-test, it was determined that 3rd and 5th graders demonstrated statistically significant gains from fall to spring. The other grade levels were not evaluated for statistical significance. Looking at our math data, here are the results of the FastBridge math comparison for fall 2021 to spring 2022. We showed substantial increases across all grade levels on these measures, especially in 2nd grade math, where the increase in students scoring in the highest categories increased 10% from fall to spring. And finally, here are the results of our iReady math comparison. All grade levels showed improvement from fall to spring in terms of the percentages of students testing on grade level. Statistical testing revealed a significant gain in grades 6 and 8. Grade 7 data was not tested for statistical significance. And with that, I'm available to take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bachna. Governing board members, do you have questions? Vice President Dr. Hartwells?
Yes. Thank you, President Snelsky. Thank you, Dr. Bachna, and your entire team for putting these data together. I think there's a lot of positive movement here to be proud of. And to that end, I just want to point out, so the FastBridge, the iReady, these assessments are just tools. They, in and of themselves, are not doing the work. Who's doing the work are the teachers, the staff, the parents, and the students. So hats off to all of you. I know it's been hard. Thank you for all your hard work. I think Dr. Bogna we had an opportunity to talk in advance, and so I appreciate very much the feedback you've been giving me, as well as recognizing some further analysis is required. And I'll just point those out for the community. Dr. Bachna pointed them out as well, and that was starting with, you numbered your slides. Thank you so much. I love that. Slide 4. What I refer to as the middle school cliff. That's not a pedagogical term, I just made that up, but it is unfortunately something we continue to see in that transition out of elementary school into middle school is a dip in academic proficiency numbers. And then a lot of times they'll rebound, but maybe not entirely. And so I appreciate very much that you acknowledged the observation and that the curriculum team is digging into both, not just the English, but also the math, because it happens in both areas. And I assume it would happen in science, and it will happen in writing. Something else is going on there, and that perhaps our interventions need to be a little different and a little more tailored. And I would appreciate an update of that analysis as that's undertaken, and thank you for doing that. I wanted to ask, I'll just point out, can we go to slide 7, please?
Yep.
So, as I explained to Dr. Bachna, the way I look at these numbers, so when I look at us compared to the state, I consider the state numbers to be a floor, not a goal. Rather that the nation is really where we're looking and higher. So the way I look at these is that we have to start from being competitive across the country and then higher than that. Where we're perhaps may need to put a little more attention, I'm sure you've noticed, is the science area. That seems to be true across the country, disappointingly, as well as in the state. Am I correct in recalling that there will be a science curriculum adoption next school year?
Good evening. Earlier this year, we refreshed our elementary kits. Next year, we will look to our secondary curriculum to identify the areas that have gaps that we either need to do a full adoption or a refresh like we did with elementary.
So the refresh with elementary was Discovery Ed?
No, we moved our FOSS kits to the next gen science kits.
Oh, so that was the refresh, was updating the kits themselves? Okay. And then, so there won't be a new curriculum adoption for secondary, grades 6 through 12 next school year?
There may
I thought there
be.
was a
What we'll
budget
be
for
doing
that.
is we'll be working with our science coaches. We have quite a bit of curriculum adoptions that we're getting caught up on from prior to the pandemic.
Sure.
And so with Johanna Kaiser and the addition of a new secondary science coach, we'll be looking at what we currently have and where we have those gaps.
Okay, I'll be interested in that analysis because these numbers would suggest that, there's some lift there. I think Ms. Kaiser and I have talked about this, and she recognizes that. So thank you, Dr. Dodds. I had asked the question on the following slide for the ACT and the grade 11, if any of these differences between the nation and Scottsdale scores, whether they were composite or the different subject matters, were statistically significant. And I didn't jot down your answer, Dr. Bachna.
For the national comparisons, I don't have the individual student results to actually evaluate successfully in a comparison to our own results for a statistical significance test.
Okay, so it's just not possible to
Right.
manipulate your data sets. Okay, and then the subsequent slide for grade 11,
Yep.
The ACT, and we had indicated there was significant gains, statistically significant gains in other slides. These losses of 0.1, were we able to determine, are those statistically significant?
I will have
Losses?
to look. I didn't
Not sure,
evaluate
okay.
all the subject areas. I just evaluated the composite score for this presentation, but I'm happy
Okay.
to look into that for you further.
Okay, thank you. The subsequent slide, which is the composite score comparisons for slide 10, I just want to point out to the community, because I thought this was actually kind of a data within a data set that was a good thing, and will be reflected, hopefully, more, kind of percolate into the actual composite scores for the next spring, and that is the number of students who actually took the exam. Because of the pandemic, that number of data points does matter, and how these numbers, how robust these numbers are. So I think that that's a favorable improvement, and I appreciate everybody's work and effort in getting students comfortable and prepared so that we had that significant amount of increase in the number of students actually taking this ACT exam. I think that was great. So I just want to pat everyone on the back for that one. The direct assessments results, which is a subsequent slide, I had asked because we have some information in an upcoming presentation about the iReady in elementary. So Dr. Bachman indicated that correctly, not all of the schools across the district have iReady in the elementary for math. But you'd have some data on that. Would you or Dr. Guerin be willing to share, just summarize for the community some of that information, knowing that not every elementary school across the district has that?
I'm not prepared to do that tonight, but I'd be happy to look into it and
Okay.
share it out, but I do have it in front of me.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, one of the reasons I bring that up is the costs associated with some of these tools. So kind of going back to my original point, which is the tools are just tools. And some of these tools are pretty expensive. And once this Esser money runs out, we're going to need to maybe be thinking about succession of different tools that are equally robust in prognostic or diagnostic, but maybe not as expensive. Let me just make sure I don't have any other questions. I think speaking of iReady, this is just to clarify and make sure that I understood correctly. On the very last slide, 14,
Yes.
grade 6 and 7, the iReady math comparisons, the differences from fall to spring, so with growth within the school year, were statistically significant, but you didn't do the analysis for grade 7, or it wasn't?
It probably is. I didn't do the analysis for grade 7.
You just did, okay, so
Yeah.
we don't know that for sure.
Right.
Okay, that would be interesting to know.
Sure.
And these were, you said p-values of 0.05?
0.05 or 0.01 in some cases.
0.05, 0.01, okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Bachman.
Yep.
Thank you, Vice President Hartwells. Do either of the other board members have any questions for Dr. Bachna? Yes, Board Member Lindsay.
Not really so much for Dr. Bachna, but I would love to hear what we're thinking about doing for the middle school kids for particularly grades 6 and 7, because they do drop off on these AASA. We're really strong in elementary, and then 6 and 7, we really slip in ELA and math compared to our peer districts. So I just like to start hearing what we're going to do to bridge that.
Absolutely, and I think I'll be working with our teaching and learning department on having those conversations as well.
Dr. Bachna, quick question to continue with Board Member Lindsay's question. It says cohort comparison, so this is the same child one year to the same child next?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. And that's something that I really appreciate, is seeing how the individual child is developing over time, not looking at a group of 11th graders this year and a group of 11th graders next year.
Right.
I prefer to see pre-post test, same child, same year, or cohort follow them longitudinally over time. To me, that's more meaningful information.
And I agree with you. I think what'll be powerful in 2 years when our 9th graders take the ACT, they'll have that ACT Aspire, same students taking the ACT, and
Right.
see how those compare. Unfortunately, we just don't have that data point right now.
Sure, and it seems like we're doing a lot of new and different things right now that we will not be able to clearly identify the effectiveness until a little further down the road.
Absolutely, right.
Okay, okay, good.
I just want to, if I can add to the question from Board Member Lindsay, the research across the nation in terms of the achievement dip related to transition from elementary to middle school, and even from middle school to high school, is consistent over probably at least 2 decades from when I started looking at it. I would argue that it's probably larger this year because of the pandemic impact. So the students from elementary to middle school, making the transition to middle school, and if you remember even how this year started, we started with one expectation, then we had to shift. We were still in person, but on top of the transition dip that we normally have, I think this one might be a little bit elevated from what we would normally expect. And what it requires is more intentional strategies to support that bridge. So we talk about summer bridge programs, particularly for students who may be struggling at the elementary level, so that we can make sure that they're ready to perform at grade level as best they can when they come into middle school. Some of it's a product of that adolescent development, and so it's a combination of factors, but definitely something we'll put a giant circle around.
And I see another concern when we're doing groups that are transitioning to middle school post-pandemic, even though we're not really past this, but the number of contact days on a campus. We have some middle school kids in 7th grade that just finished 7th grade that could have potentially missed out on a year and a half of seat time, direct interaction with a certified instructor. So I think that does also make a difference. I'm not making excuses, but I try to figure out, why is the data indicating what it is? So I'll look forward to also learning more about what happens with the same child as we continue to move on. It'd be interesting also to see those that took advantage of some of our summer learning opportunities, how that has impacted them as well.
Absolutely, I agree.
Board Member Greenberg, up in the cloud, do you have any comments or questions?
No, I appreciate the thorough discussion here. Obviously, Dr. Bachna provided these results last week, and I've reviewed the good sides and negative sides. I think the main thing here is that our board and clearly our district remain focused on academic achievement. I think that these results show steps in the right direction here. Obviously, we're not going to get 100% in every category overnight. It takes time, but I think that with the strategic plan and the focus that we have here, we will see improvement year over year in these results. So thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Board Member Greenberg. And Dr. Bachna, thank you to your team and whoever had anything to do with this presentation. I know it was a lot of work. If there are no other questions, we will move on to information discussion item 4B, which is Special Education Task Force. Dr. Menzel, can you introduce?
Yeah, I can. So Dr. Guerin is joining us in the cloud, and we have Marge Rayberg and Dr. Williams here in person. I'm not sure if there's any other of the task force members present, but we're going to turn it over to Dr. Guerin. As you know, this is a multi-year project, and we're looking forward to sharing the results and recommendations.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. President Sinowski, Vice President Dr. Hartwell, governing board members, cabinet, and guests. We are very excited to present almost 3 years of work of the Special Ed Task Force We had planned to take about a year or a year and a half on this work, but of course, the pandemic altered our timeline, but really gave us time to go deep, and we have some action steps to share with you tonight. Before I begin, I want to congratulate Ms. Rayberg on her retirement. She has spent decades serving public education and students, and I want to congratulate her on retirement and thank her for all that she's done for SUSD. I also want to welcome Dr. Brooke Williams and congratulate her on becoming our new Director of Special Education. Dr. Williams was on the task force for 3 years, which is incredibly helpful in moving this work forward. I could not imagine doing this work without these two tremendously talented women, and I want to wish them all the best moving forward. You were in good hands with Dr. Williams. So back to the presentation. So the next slide shares just some of our members on the Special Education Task Force. If you could move that ahead for me, please. We have the task force members. We also had a process design leadership team that planned the meetings. And during the heart of COVID, on the next slide, you will find the summer work group members. So we had our core team, and we fanned out to bring new members in throughout the process, and also to create small work groups to get started on the work during COVID. So this worked very well to have many voices at the table during this process. We began focusing on vision and purpose, and we've shared our vision statement before. And again, it's aligned with SUSD's core purpose. And our purpose statement was to work together in a problem-solving capacity and create common understanding, agreement, and alignment on specific challenges and strengths in SUSD and how to move forward in all areas. Now, we had to prioritize because there's so much work to be done whenever you take on a task like this. And so we chose several objectives, and we had to prioritize which ones we would focus on. So on the next slide, you will see our objective areas of focus. We wanted to dive deep with the special education weekly meetings, making them more inclusive, making them productive, and creating common understanding about purpose and why they were held. Second, we wanted to look at student behavior needs. And this was a challenge that we documented before the pandemic hit, and we've seen this across the board become an even greater challenge. So it's certainly an area of focus for all students. We need to increase understanding of process and procedures, establishing agreed upon expectations and norms throughout the organization, a focus on inclusion, and providing access to grade level program and content to the best extent possible for all students. And we wanted to develop training and support for staff members. And this has never been more important as we look at staffing shortages across the state and the nation. I'd like to turn it over now to Ms. Rayberg so she can take us through our areas of focus.
Okay, the area of focus, as Dr. Guerin has already touched on, process, procedures, behaviors, staff support and training, inclusion, including rigor and access to general education and special education weekly meeting. And with that, we turn them into problem statements to drill down to what exactly does that look like, and then moving on to how we can come up with solutions. So for behavior problem statement, we know that behaviors impact the entire classroom, and we've never seen such an uptick as after COVID for social emotional and the need to address some of behaviors through a multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS, and that would be consistent across all buildings. And very important critical piece of that is de-escalating behaviors. So first of all, instead of having to go to the next and the more severe interventions, we can start with those de-escalation, and that's all around training. So that's something we need to focus on across the district, and students that are unfortunately disrupting the environment of all students, and it's not just special education students, it can be in all students. And then again, also lack of resources, having more behavior specialists, although they're hard to find, but having them available to the sites to support is a big need too, and a problem. For process and procedure, we know that having a strong multi-tier system of support on academic as well as behavior sides of the model will help consistently across the sites implement and become more consistent in our procedures. Rigor problem statement, near and dear to my heart, is how our students are going to access general education. And again, it's going to be about resources, lack of needing more and having more para support, our scheduling of getting students into classes. One excellent model that is research-based and we know that it works is the co-teaching model. So if we can train up and implement that more, we kind of automatically are having kids in general education. You know, it is a costlier model, but you have the expertise of general education with the curriculum and then the specialist in addressing the unique needs of the special education learner. And for staff support, this is all about having time, which we know is a huge resource as well, for the certified class special education teacher to meet with the paras and the related service support staff to have that connection. So time, which we know turns over to resources. And what happens is even they do build that relationship, and then because of our high turnover with the current state of education, that frustrates staff. You start a relationship, you build it, you have this great, and then, you know, people move on. So that's part of staff support problem. And finally, the special education weekly swim. The lack of understanding across the district that we have to weigh out the educational rights of the special education student who may at the school site being asked to move to a different learning environment, but coupling that with the steps that need to happen before a student's learning environment is changed is a big area that we've been trying to educate people about. And then sometimes that takes time to go through those legal and ethical steps that need to happen. So you're trying to balance out the well-being of the site with the student who needs more support. Okay. And now I was going to turn this over to Dr. Williams, who has all the answers.
Right, all the answers. So what I am going to present to you guys is some of the findings from the Hanover Research. So for anyone who might not know, we did use Hanover to do survey results as well as focus groups. So this is some of their recommendations that came out of those surveys, as well as working with the Special Education Task Force, who's been working together for 3 years on those problem statements, and then coming up with some of our own action steps to move that work and the process forward. All right, so the first recommendation, and these recommendations first are from Hanover themselves. So the first recommendation that they had was really to help support those general education teachers who participate in our co-teaching models. Through the survey, we found out that many teachers, both the general education as well as the special education teachers, did not feel that they had the knowledge or the confidence in order to do a co-teaching model with Fidelity. So one of their research, one of the recommendations is for us to continue to look at those co-teaching models and how we're supporting both the special education as well as the general education teachers. The second recommendation is to provide instructional staff with more resources and more time. What was indicated on the survey was that staff had a lack of materials as well as a lack of planning time, and didn't feel that they had the resources available to support students in general. There also was an idea that there was a lack of there was some inconsistencies in our implementation of our special ed materials as well as our training and support. The third recommendation, again from Hanover, was surrounding our RTI and MTSS process. Both staff as well as parents indicated that they did not understand the process, or if there even was a process within their school for their students to get support through RTI and MTSS. So they would like us to look a little bit into that, both for academic as well as behavior. So the action steps that the special education team came up with to address some of these recommendations, the first one is to continue to roll out the newly designed special ed weekly meeting process, improve access through virtual platforms to schools, teachers, psychologists, everyone that's at the building, and increase communication leading to support of all IEP teams across the district. The second action step is in alignment with our strategic plan to encourage cross-collaboration amongst our departments. So working with teaching and learning, working with special ed to come up with a district-wide MTSS process that's inclusive of both academic and behavior tiered supports for students. This is already in the works and will be rolled out to principals and buildings at the beginning of the year. Our action step number 3 is to investigate best practice implementation of co-teaching models at the elementary level, middle school, and high school levels within SUSD. This leads to a development of pilot sites to expand those inclusionary practices at all levels. Action step number 4 is re-envision the behavior intervention systems. Like everyone has said on here, that has kind of been a key focus for us, especially post-COVID. So bringing in new resources for our teachers, for our staff, to get them that just-in-time support to help support behaviors on their campus. Our fifth action step is increasing communication and ease of access of resources through the creation of both an internal and external website to include the special ed handbook. What came up in the survey was that both parents and teachers didn't know where to go to get all of the information on processes and procedures, and there were some inconsistencies with that. So creating a digital resource to support everyone is part of our action plan. And the last one is in support of strategic plan goal number 3 to co-create a professional development plan for all special education staff. And this will be led by mentor teachers that we are funding through one of our new grants to support educational outcomes for all students. So in closing, our vision for this future of students receiving special education services within SUSD is to join together in a unified commitment to SUSD's core purpose for students with disabilities adopted and embraced by all stakeholders. We will be creating action committees through these action steps to move this work forward, building both on our special education task force that's already created, as well as bringing other stakeholders into the mix. With that, I welcome questions.
Governing board members, questions? Vice President Dr. Harwells.
Thank you, President Snowski. Thank you, Ms. Rayberg and Dr. Williams, and to all the task committee, the Special Education Task Force, and their perseverance through a pandemic. I wanted to ask a couple that converge into the same area with respect to the survey. You mentioned that in terms of feedback, parents were expressing some just uncertainty of where to find information at their school with respect to supports that are available at their school. Were there other areas that you were getting feedback from the parent community? Since IEP, this is such an individualized area, and the parents have to be integrally involved in the implementation of the education for their student. Was that kind of that education component the primary component? Were there other areas that you were getting feedback from the parents and their advocates, if they have them?
So the survey results really focused in on those core areas of need. So those purpose or the problem statements that we presented at the beginning,
Yeah.
the survey really focused in on that.
Okay.
We did some preliminary focus groups with small numbers. So this is something that we probably need to investigate a little bit more on families. One of the things they did indicate is that finding the resources, finding the processes and procedures and understanding those was a challenge for them.
Yeah, I can imagine. I like this co-teaching idea. I like that there was learning from peer districts in the proposal to learn best practices and how to operationalize efficiently. And my question is the goal with the co-teaching as a procedural goal to get to a goal of a % gen ed for special education students to the extent practical?
I think the first thing we need to do, co-teaching models right now in Scottsdale really are only happening at high school level. So really even piloting them at the elementary and middle school level is going to be important to determine what resources do we need to do that in a way that makes sense for our students, for our staff, for our schools, and then really looking at those best practices for inclusionary practices and for those co-teaching models and determining how we roll those out and how we change some of the systems that we already have in place.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, and I hope that where we're going is a commitment to the extent practical and safe that each student has a baseline % of gen ed in their IEP. I hope that that's where that's going, and again, I appreciate that being in there. I thought that was a nice, strong recommendation. Thank you again for all of your work.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, I have some. I'd like to thank you guys because you have shown the good, the bad, and the ugly, and an extensive process to get there. So instead of coming to us and coming to the public and saying, these are all the great things we're doing, you're honoring and recognizing the feedback from the surveys and being honest about the results of where we need to go to get better. And I really appreciate that, and I think that helps to build trust within our community, so thank you. I do have a question. Is the swim a replacement for what was the IPT?
No. So the IPT process, or what would maybe potentially be called the MTSS process, is a school-based process. So
Okay.
that is kind of our child find within each school.
Okay.
Looking at students, determining what needs they have, looking at interventions. The special ed weekly meeting is our process when a student needs to change least restrictive environments. So it is a meeting with special ed core as well as school-based teams in order to support needs of the students on campus. If a student needs to increase services or decrease services, or if they're just having challenges with a student that they need help or kind of like a brainstorming team, that's what the special ed weekly meeting is for.
Okay, and so that is site-specific?
Yes, the site team, the IEP team meets
Right.
with the special education administration.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that for me. You mentioned there's a shortage of behavior specialists, and I do understand, regardless of a student's placement in our education system, behavior is important, right? So when you talk about potentially piloting, have we had discussions about training our own and kind of growing our own in behavior specialists, whether they're special education certified or general education certified? Has there been discussion about that yet?
We've talked a little bit about it. We do have an in-house board-certified behavior analyst, so BCBA, in SUSD. So it's my goal to work with her to determine how we best support that behavior team, as well as looking at interdepartmentalized, working with the general education teaching and learning side and how they're supporting behavior and academic supports and interventions on campuses.
Okay, super. And then I'll go through mine because otherwise I'll forget. Thank you. You mentioned, or the survey mentioned, a frustration or a deficit in lack of materials. Is that something that can be brought forth prior to this next school year so that individuals who felt like they didn't have the materials they needed to work with students, that we could have those in place for when kids show up in August?
Yes, I've already been having conversations with teaching and learning, looking at making sure that teachers have both general education as well as special education curriculum in their classrooms, and then looking at training models and whether or not we need extra professional development in those areas.
Super. And one last thing. I loved hearing that there was an interest in creating a special ed handbook because that is providing a central location, central place for information that is consistent. So thank you for whoever is going to.
It exists
Charge that-
already.
It does?
It does. It's just looking at how to digitalize it and
Yes.
make sure that it's updated
Accessible?
and that it's accessible for everybody.
Super, great, thank you. Vice President Dr. Hart-Wells.
Yes, thank you, President Snowski. I apologize to have you circle back, but there was one more question, and it is related to what you've been speaking about in terms of behavior, but intersections with this middle school cliff that we see in a broader context. And one thing you mentioned, I believe, Ms. Rayberg, was the transitioning, right, this happens, they transition into a different school. Well, my understanding is sometimes in special education, the students aren't transitioning to the same school that their peers that they had been with have transitioned to. So they're really, really starting over into a new community. And already that's hard in middle school, right, in high school, those teenage years. Is there an intent to keep that kind of top of mind? I realize that we have kind of logistical challenges in terms of staffing, and every program can't be everywhere. However, if the intent is to...
And that's, Marge might have more history on this than I do, but I also sat on a committee 4 or 5 years ago, trying to look at alignment of programming from elementary school through high school. And it is logistically a big puzzle to look at. Fiscally, just numbers of students, where they're headed, the change in that happens yearly or in cohorts. But that is something that's at the top of our priority list, to try and keep students in their feeder pattern as much as humanly possible.
It's just common sense, right? You're going to expect behavior struggles and emotional struggles in a transition regardless. And so I appreciate that you keeping that top of mind. Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions? Board Member Greenberg?
No. Again, I just think I think this work is really important, and as you know, I had emailed Dr. Guerin about how we would measure success here, what types of positive outcomes we would see, what might be the negative outcomes if our focus is not in the right place. She provided a helpful response that this will all be tied to the objectives, objectively measurable goals in the strategic plan, and we've been sent a draft of that as board members. So it'll be interesting to see how this works out. I know a number of the board members have requested an internal audit of this area. It looks like our next internal audit will not be in this area, given the work that's going on with the special education task force. So I think for the board and for the public, we just need to keep a keen eye on this and see if this works out. I do actually have one question, though. Are you able to speak at all to hiring issues, employment issues within, or staffing issues, I should really say, within the special education department? What are we had discussed it earlier this year, and we had a number of vacant positions. I remember 20 plus vacant positions in some areas. What's that looking like for next year?
So we are working really hard. Our building principals are working really hard to recruit and look at applications and interview and hire as many special education teachers as possible. It's not just an SUSD challenge. This is really across the state and across the nation, especially when it comes to the special education world. Looking both at our teachers as well as our paraprofessionals. But that number has dropped. We are down to 15 vacancies as of today, so better than 27.
It is.
It is.
Perfect. Thank you very much for updating the board on that point.
Seeing no other questions, thank you, Ms. Rayberg, and congratulations on your retirement. And then Dr. Williams, welcome, and Dr. Guerin, I hope you're feeling better as well.
Thank you.
And we will move. We'll move on to information discussion item 4C, first read of the AP Government, AP Economics, and IB Economics adoption. Dr. Dodds Karen.
Good evening, Board President Sanowski, Vice President Dr. Hart-Wells, Board Member Lindsay, and in the cloud, Board Member Greenberg. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to share with you tonight the work of the Curriculum Adoption Committee for AP Government, AP Economics, and IB Econ. I want to share with you a little bit about the curriculum adoption process. I believe each of you has been through a curriculum adoption cycle before, but for our community, I do want you to be aware of a few steps that we do take and processes that we put into place to ensure we have representation from not only our community, but our teachers and our administrators, and even a student. So found here on our PowerPoint slide, you will see that there is a link to our district website. I do want to call attention to the use of our district website. This is the hub for communicating all things related to our adoption. It is found on the adoption page, where all items related to our meetings, our agendas, our PowerPoints can be found. In terms of a timeline, we began recruiting for our committee in January. We used our committee hub, which we found to be a really valuable tool in our district with that Google form to seek participation. We also extended that timeline a little bit longer than we had planned because we were trying to get more stakeholder representation for serving on the committee. We do have quite a few committees taking place this year, as you know, and so we wanted to be sure we did our best to get as many people involved as possible. In addition to the timeline that we followed for our meetings as well as our curriculum reviews, I also want you to know that there was a public display of our curriculum. You can see pictures here. This was in the MDA Building B. There's also on the second picture that you see a QR code. That QR code is there so that any community member or teacher who came to look at the curriculum could scan that QR code and give comment specific to that curriculum. But throughout the presentation, I'll share with you a little bit about how we ran our meetings. As I mentioned, we utilized Committee Hub for our recruitment. Here you will see a list of the participants on our committee, of whom I would like to give great thanks and appreciation for the time they committed, the additional meetings that we added to our timeline to ensure we had ample time to review our curriculum. We had representation from parents, from administrators, teachers, members of the teaching and learning team, and as I mentioned, a student. The members of the teaching and learning team, Stephen Williamson with AP Government and Politics, myself for AP Macroeconomics, and Jonna Wallace for IB Economics, we each served as a facilitator for the small groups. So you might remember when we brought to you the information about our novel selection process, how we utilized small groups to facilitate those grade levels. We did something similar here because of the different content areas that we were going to be exploring for curriculum. The overall process that we followed included the group coming together for our first meeting. We did some getting to know you activities, but we also had some conversation about criteria we believed would be important when evaluating and determining curriculum that would be appropriate for use in our classrooms. We looked to some information from West Ed, for example. We looked at some information in the literature associated with curriculum. And then we also got feedback from parent perspective, from teacher perspective, administrator perspective, and student perspective about what we all believed would be important in curriculum so that we could identify some criteria. From that, we whittled it down and I'll explain in the next slide about our rubric. We divided the information, categorized it, I should say, into components that would be found in all curriculum and something that we also wanted to potentially replicate for future curriculum adoptions so that we don't have a different rubric every time we go through, that we have some key components to all of the curriculum that we want to utilize in Scottsdale schools. Once we established our criteria, the criteria was sent out to our vendors and publishers, and this is a common practice that we follow. In this process, the letter goes out and the publishers are informed of what we're looking for with curriculum. And they then determine, do they believe that the curriculum they have available meets the criteria we will be looking for? So from that, I just want you to have an idea. We sent out to 16 different vendors or publishers for AP, for the government, and for the economics. We received 4, and we sent it out to 4 for IB. When we received response from those vendors, we had 6 vendors respond for AP that they would be interested in submitting their curriculum. 5 actually participated. And then with the IB, 4 of the 4 that said they were interested did submit for us. So once we had our curriculum, that's when our small group work began. We introduced the rubrics to our committee. Our rubrics include some key features because, as we know, in education, we speak our own language. So we wanted our families to understand, we wanted our teachers actually to have a common understanding of what our look-fors were with that curriculum. So we included some guide points in the rubric as well. We reviewed our rubrics, and then we began the work in our small groups of looking at the curriculum, page by page, picture by picture, to just evaluate it based on some specific information that I'll elaborate on in a moment. During that time, while we were in 3 different spaces, there would also be some small group discussion as they were looking at the material. Throughout the time of our committee meetings, I do want you to know we did add, and we reflected that on our website, an additional meeting. We found as we were looking through the material, for example, 5 different textbooks and the supplementals, that we needed to add another meeting, and we did that. I also want you to know that we received some positive feedback. On the previous slide where I showed that we had it on display for the community, this also worked out really well for our committee members. The timing of our committee being in the spring, as we all know, is a very busy time of the year, and we also had another little round of COVID. So members of our committee were impacted by their own family commitments as well as being sick. So if people weren't able to be present for our actual meetings, they could come into this public display place where the textbooks were, and you can't see it too clearly, but there's also a computer there. So they could log on to the digital resources as well. So that was available for our committee members, and feedback from our committee was that they found that to be very helpful because they could come and they could spend 3 hours combing through the curriculum if they needed additional time, which we appreciated that positive feedback. Once we had reviewed all of the curriculum, everything gets tabulated on their rubrics, and we score it, we categorize it on an Excel spreadsheet. Based on the evaluation criteria, we then whittled it down to our top 2 or our top 3 vendors or publishers that we were going to seek presentations from. So we invited our vendors and publishers to come in and give formal presentations to our groups. Again, we did this in 3 small groups based on the curriculum that the committee members were representing. At that time, they utilized the rubric again to evaluate the curriculum based on the presentations and the additional information people were able to learn during the formal presentations by the publishers. Also, I would like to draw attention to that time. Again, in the spring, it was busy. We had members of our committee who could not be there. So while we had in-person presentations, we actually set up Teams meetings and recorded the presentations so that people who were not physically present could come into our office and view the presentations and score on their rubric based on their evaluation of the video recording. Our rubric, which I can provide you a copy of as well, I believe you received it as a link. This was organized into 3 particular categories. 1, alignment to standards and depth of knowledge. Another, ease of use and support. And then lastly, engagement and ability to meet students' need. Each of these had subcategories, but these were themes that emerged when we did our initial what were we looking for activity in alignment with the information from West Ed for curriculum. At the conclusion of the presentations and the evaluations, the recommendations that we will bring forward to you for AP Macroeconomics, this was the committee that I facilitated, we will be recommending approval of Krugman's Macroeconomics for the AP course. It is published by Bedford, Freeman, and Worth. For AP Government Politics, AP Government Politics, this was led by Stephen Williamson, our social studies coach, who has just recently retired. We were recommending American Government, Stories of a Nation, and this is the Bedford, Freeman, and Worth publication again. Our teachers call this the Abernathy and Waples book. So it gets a little confusing when the teachers are talking about it and we're talking about it. I talk about it as a title or a publisher, and the teachers all refer to it as the authors. And then for IB Economics, we will be recommending Pearson's publication, which is Economics for the IB Diploma course. So with that, I'd like to share with you our overall recommendation. Thanks to the help of Dr. Bachna's team, CIMAR ran for me numbers. I asked Stacy in CIMAR to run 5 years of enrollment so we could gauge what does our enrollment typically look like in AP Gov, AP Econ, and IB. Obviously, with the pandemic and schools shifting, we knew that there were going to be some changes in enrollment there, but based on the 5-year projections that we could gain from enrollment, we were able to project numbers that we believe are an accurate representation of what we will need. I do want you to know we also keep about 2 class sets of hard books on our shelves, which will actually accommodate any growth we have. We kind of put that buffer in as we looked at the numbers. So the overall cost that we are seeking approval for these recommended texts would be $231,000 for curriculum for the next 7 years.
All right.
Questions?
Thank you, Dr. Dodds. Karen. Governing board members, any questions or comments? Vice President Dr. Hart-Wells.
Thank you, President Snowski. Thank you, Dr. Dodds. And again, to all of those volunteers and staff that served on these curriculum adoption committees, and their time and effort and energy. So my question, just the perspective I'm interested in is to ensure that the recommendation is content that has been cross-referenced back to the goal, which is to pass an AP exam, pass that IB exam. So the IB diploma book by Pearson's clearly been written in a way that tees itself up to be approved in Switzerland, right? The big poobah of IB there. But what about AP? How do we know that what you're recommending here are adequately going to prepare our students to pass these exams?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Hart-Wells. A few things. When we seek publishers or vendors, we do look to who the College Board has approved for use. Additionally, in speaking with Ashley Croce, who you've had a chance to meet and see a few different times, I learned with AP Gov specifically, that particular book is actually written by high school teachers, and they feel is very well aligned with the AP curriculum for the exam.
So my understanding then is, at least on the AP side, College Board, these 2 that are being recommended are on their list of approved curriculum. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Any other questions, governing board members? Nope. And again, this was a first read, so we will not be, yes, go ahead, Board Member Greenberg.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure if you were going to make a comment. Just looking this over, would we be able to get the committee notes or something before the second read, just so we can look over kind of what was discussed, what issues were identified, and get a better understanding for why these books were chosen?
Board Member Greenberg, so would you be looking for the rubrics with the comments made by the different committee members?
Yeah, if there's no committee, if there was no agreed to, I thought there might be an agreed to committee commentary sheet, but if there isn't, could we get the individual rubrics or?
Yeah. We can certainly scan those.
Great, thank you.
Okay. All right, seeing no more comments, thank you, Dr. Dodds Karen, for that first read of our AP Government, AP Economics, and IB Economics adoption of the materials. We are moving on to 4D. Dr. Menzel, can you please introduce our end-of-the-year Esser report presenters?
A pleasure to do so. Tonight we have Shannon Crozier and Alice Bengola to provide an update on where we are with respect to the various Esser funds that we have, both from a financial and programmatic perspective.
Thank you. Good evening, President Snowski, Vice President Dr. Hart-Wells, members of the board, Dr. Menzel, and guests. Tonight we're looking at the Esser end of the year, where we're at. Some of these things, we haven't quite finished the year, but it gives a good representation of where we are at this point. So looking at the financials, we have 3 different Esser grants that we were allocated, the first one being Esser 1. This grant actually is pretty close to being finished up. It does end the end of September of this year. So we have about $226,000 still remaining in that. We are using those funds to pay for summer programming this summer. which will far exceed $200,000. So that will wipe out the ESSER 1 funds from that. As we look at ESSER 2, this one we have about a year, just over a year left as it ends next September. The big areas that we focused on with ESSER 2 being supportive community education, learning loss, personal protective equipment, retention stipend. We've spent a considerable amount of those funds. We still have funds that are encumbered for this year, as well as anticipating what we'll need in the future for next year, looking at still funding learning loss programs through there. We have COVID support positions, which have been the Esser coordinator, the financial support for Esser, as well as a COVID specialist. And then again, doing summer school programs through there. So we anticipate those three things will wrap up the final amounts left within ESSER 2 and close that grant out. Then we get into ESSER 3, which is actually where the bulk of the money from ESSER came from. But we've been focusing the last 2 years on really getting the spending down within ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. However, ESSER 3 has had some considerable amount of expenditures go through there as well. So earlier this year, we approved a COVID retention stipend for our staff. So we paid out the first half of that. The second half, we anticipate being either equal to or a little bit less than what the first half of that was. And we'll pay that out. We haven't determined a date yet on that, but that'll be after school comes back in probably early September, October area. COVID support positions. We ramped this up quite a bit. And I want to explain, part of that is that for ESSER 2, we paid for our coordinator out of that and some office staff. For this ESSER 3 program, we realized this year we needed more support for our staff. They were drowning out at the schools, be it the nurses as well as the front offices, with having to do screenings and doing checks when somebody got COVID to see who they were close contacts with. And so that just put a huge extra burden on our staff. And so we felt it necessary earlier this year to say, we're going to provide extra support for you. So at all of the schools, we added a 0.5 FTE position for office staff to be able to help out there. We provided a float nurse as well as additional hours for our nurses so that they had the time to be able to actually do the paperwork and some of the other things they needed to do. They were doing it after school because during the school day they were dealing with students. So we pumped quite a bit of money into that this last year, and we have some money held aside in the future if that's something that we find that we need. We've put it somewhat on hold just to see what does it look like when school returns next year. But we do have money set aside in case we find there's an influx of numbers and we need to get some more support. We put aside some money for communications so that they can do what's necessary to help support our schools again with attracting and retaining staff. We have a small amount left in contingency. We've actually reduced that considerably from where it was originally. Funds inside for facilities. That really comes down to the MERV filters that we have in the classroom. Those are really expensive and they have to be replaced quite often. So we've got funding set aside for that as well as other facility needs that might come up. Learning loss obviously being the highest area for us. And I know that farther in the presentation, Ms. Bengola is going to talk about what we've done for learning loss and how those funds have been used. We have a small amount we put aside for PPE. We've really slowed down on what we're doing on that. We do have quite a bit of masks, but we're on hand. But we're still trying to keep a good stock of hand sanitizer, cleaning supplies, that type of thing. We put some funding in for Scottsdale Online Learning. What we found is that program was really successful, and there's still families that are or that were concerned about coming back into the classroom. And so we've got money set aside so that we can keep that program going for all grade levels versus at the high school level. Again, summer programs. This summer, we'll be taking care of out at ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, but to be able to have programming for the future until this grant expires, we've got money set aside for that. Technology, there's $2 million in there. We've used some of that for computers and other technological items within the classroom. We went to one-to-one devices when we went to COVID, when we sped that up. But that means that things have to be replaced and things get broken and have to be fixed. So we've got money set aside for that. And then the last one that we did for this grant, which we didn't do for the other two, is it is eligible for indirect costs. And so we set aside funding to be able to charge the grant for indirect costs. There's a lot of things that happen outside of Ms. Mangola's office that has to do with Esser, that happens within payroll and HR and finance. So we decided at that point to go ahead and put some money aside for indirect costs. So with that, we still have money remaining. You know, we've budgeted out where we think things will land, but this grant goes till September of '24. So we'll be revising it as we go through and seeing just where things land. And if there's, you know, we want to have money in places where we can move it around if we find we need more in a certain area to be able to take care of the students and make sure that we're really addressing the needs of the schools.
Good evening, Board. Dr. Menzel. As you can see, our first category was learning loss and acceleration. Tutoring was a large part of our method to try to recoup some of that learning loss and try to accelerate the learnings to close that gap. So Varsity Tutors ended up being quite a successful endeavor. We had 1,133 student hours spent this year. Scottsdale Quarantine Tutoring, that is the tutoring that was done by our teachers and our staff. 912 hours were spent in tutoring. And ASU Distance Learning Support, that was a program that was discussed and partnered with ASU, and it's a little bit different of a structure in that a student that might be out for that 10 full days, they would partner with ASU and they would have several hours a day spent with ASU tutors to help with the curriculum that they were missing. So it was really a partnership. They may not use the exact same materials, but they would work on the same goals. So we spent some time working with them to give them our curriculum maps so that they could anticipate where our kids were that were going to be absent, and they could match their curriculum with the goals of our school. In proposals, as you know, we've presented before about the proposals, and just to give a recap for the learning loss and acceleration, our Tonto Creek Mobile STEM Lab was a huge success. We're actually going to continue that next year using Esser funds. And on a side note, we're going to continue that in the summer using our Azsci on Track. So they're going to be part of our summer program in July. The Dbq Project was the document-based questions by our social studies coach, Stephen Williamson, and I provided with you some feedback that was given. He has worked extensively with the teachers in social studies, and we are going to continue that project for next year. Reading specialists and math specialists, as we've spoken before, we did hire several reading and math specialists based on proposals, and we are expanding that as part of our growing our MTSS system. The IB drop-in and diligent den of wolves, that was at Desert Mountain High School. Dr. Hirsch provided some data as to the benefits that those students received and the interest in also extending that onto next year. And the math lab and English lab was with Principal Akbari, and that proved to be a very beneficial program as well. We will plan on continuing tutoring next year. However, it will have a little bit more structure and guidelines, and that's simply because Esser is now requiring that. If you notice, you'll see some asterisks throughout the presentation. Those are items that we have used or that we're spending Esser funds for that are called set-aside funds. Esser 3 requires us to set aside 20% of our dollars to fund and make up for learning loss. And those are part of those set-aside funds. Summer learning has been a huge endeavor and a huge expansion from what I understand as what we've done in the past. So our summer learning expanded last year, and it expanded even more this year. So we have our high school summer program that we are no longer charging our families for, and Esser is paying for that. We have approximately 57 teachers this year in our high school program, so it is proving to be a program that is much needed and much taken advantage. The students are taking advantage of that. Our elementary school has started their summer boost program at Redfield and at Pima. And then our Title I pre-K through 2 Jumpstart program, that is with Margaret Cerna, and that is going to be a small program that they start for their Title I students, and Esser will be covering that. They're also, in her department, starting Newcomer Orientation. And Newcomer Orientation is for our students that are new to the English language and new to SUSD. And then our Gifted Summer School program, Esser is also funding that. And I believe that just completed last week or earlier this week. So in the social emotional learning category, we had Not My Kid, which was another organization similar to Jewish Family Services, but offering quite different structures. So Not My Kid was instrumental with one of our middle schools where they did quite a few assemblies, and then working with focused groups based on teacher recommendation and behavior data. Jewish Family Children's Services continues to be a big partner of ours, and as you can see here, according to Ms. Cron, we had 8,064 students provided with support from JCFS or participating in classroom presentations. Again, as far as social emotional learning and the proposals that Esser funded and continues to fund, are those regulation stations that we talked about and discussed last time I presented at Hohokam. We have had several schools ask that we might be able to fund those types of stations for their classrooms as well in their schools. Professional development has been a huge part for our Student Support Service Department, where we've been able to fund professional development for our social workers as well as our teaching staff and principals. We've bought curriculum into zones of regulation, flex thinking, our student assistance program curriculum, and also PBIS training. So as far as learning loss and acceleration, there's some additional programs and proposals that Esser has funded. We have funded Prisms of Reality this year is our pilot program in Tanalea and at Coronado. We funded the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy, which you heard quite a bit about in earlier presentations. We were able to help our gifted department buy some curriculum since they do not receive separate funding from the state. SAP curriculum, as I mentioned earlier, our iReady program, not only for assessment, but for instruction, and a new intervention program that one of the reading specialists that we funded this year implemented over at Tanalea, which is our leveled literacy intervention by Fountas and Pinnell. For facilities and PPE, we didn't forget them. We had water testing at all of our facilities when we turned those drinking fountains back on and the water stations back on. We had water bottle filling stations at several sites, if not all. HEPA filters continue, as Shannon mentioned. That is quite an abundance of cost, but nevertheless necessary. ABM cleaning has stepped up and helped us with our lunch time cleaning, so we have employed them. And the PPE supplies and COVID tests were also purchased last year.
Correction.
Yeah.
It's they're MERV filters, not
Oh,
not HEPA.
MERV
Yeah.
filters. Thank you.
Yep.
So to replenish and upgrade in technology, as Shannon mentioned, we have the digital devices for both students and staff. We have also begun the cyber safety training and monitoring that Dr. Watt is implementing through the technology department. E-glass is a type of device, I think it's made by Hovercam, which just helps provide another way to deliver a lesson to those students that are learning remotely. We've upgraded clocks and intercom systems in many of our buildings, and we continue to have that work be done. And then, of course, the materials for installation and various cabling and things that I probably don't know too much about, but it's all that technical stuff. And in communications, we have assisted them so that we can hopefully recoup some of those students that we've lost and also increase our staffing ability. Salaries and stipends, as Shannon mentioned, in personnel, we have our retention stipends, our .5 office staff, extra hours for our nurses, the COVID specialist, the Esser coordinator, and fiscal specialist, along with our Scottsdale Online teachers that we've been funding. And with that, questions?
Governing board members, do you have any questions at this point? Yes, Dr. Hartwells.
So I realize that we're running long and we have a lot left to get to. I have actually a lot of questions, so I'm going to submit those to you in writing, and I will just let you, give you a preview. They're all about outcomes.
Great.
Okay.
It's a great way
Thank
to
you
handle
for the
that.
presentation.
Yes. Board Member Greenberg, do you have any questions?
Yeah, if we could just be CC'd in the responses to those questions, because I think that's where my mind was going, so I'd appreciate that. Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Hartwells, for sending those in.
I have a quick question I'm hoping you can answer. When you're referencing summer learning opportunities, and we had this information about our academic progress, right? And we are identifying that our middle school kiddos need this support. I didn't see a middle school summer learning opportunity.
Thank you for bringing that up. The middle school is funded by DSEG. It's a separate funding. So while we still
there
have
are?
middle school,
Okay.
middle school
Good to know.
programming is existing. It's
Okay.
just not funded under the Esser umbrella.
Good to know. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, and then if I have other questions, I have a few more here, but I can forward those along as well.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And we are moving on to Code of Conduct update. Dr. Menzel, can you please introduce, I believe this next
Sorry, I
speaker
could hurry.
is going to be doing the next two.
That is
EAF.
correct.
Okay.
Shannon Cron will be taking the lead on the presentation for Code of Conduct as well as our wellness, and so we'll turn it over to Shannon.
Great. Good evening, Dr. Sanowski, or Board President Sanowski, Dr. Hartwells, Mr. Lindsay, Dr. Menzel, and members of the audience. So I am honored to be here tonight and share with you the recommendations of the Code of Conduct Committee. So as you can see, the Code of Conduct Committee was made up of several individuals from both the elementary, middle school, high school areas. We also had a student on the committee, and this information was also brought forward to our principals, our assistant principals, and then shared with teachers on different campuses and also with students as well to just kind of gather feedback around some recommendations that we would like to bring forward or make. So the purpose of the Code of Conduct Committee is to be in compliance with federal, state, and local law, also to ensure that consistency in the implementation of the code across SUSD. We, of course, want to make sure that we are creating a positive learning environment, focusing on prevention, and to develop clear and appropriate and also consistent expectations and consequences to address disruptive behavior, and then ensure fairness, equity, and continuous improvement. So last year, you may remember that we talked a lot about making our code of conduct a little bit more friendly. And so we added kind of a welcome statement. We talked a lot about social emotional learning and what that looks like. when we talk about behavioral expectations, we kind of shifted to more of a restorative, some restorative practices within the code. And so I just wanted to share with you a little bit of an update in regards to where we're at with some of those recommendations from last year as well. So as you've heard tonight, that we were awarded the School Safety Program grant, which really allowed us to expand social worker support across the district. And so the social workers have been instrumental in regards to really helping us kind of focus on prevention and then also some of those social emotional supports, which decrease behaviors because we're increasing those protective factors. We've implemented the SABRS, which is that universal screening, to have a better understanding of how are our students doing and what are those needs. So therefore, we can make more meaningful recommendations in regards to some of those tier 1 type of supports that would be pushed into classrooms. We've enhanced training on the positive behavior intervention and supports, which is really kind of our goal to decrease or to prevent problematic behaviors from occurring. So teaching students, what are our behavioral expectations up front as soon as they walk onto campus. We've increased the trauma-informed practices and then also restorative practices. We've had the opportunity to train APs, counselors, and social workers on the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines, the CSTAG. We'll be making some changes to those practices for next year, including, the Be Smart material, which will be rolled out. Schools already have that material this year, but we're going to be doing another big training with all of those different stakeholder groups to make sure, not only are they trained in the guidelines, but also make sure that everybody has information on Be Smart and then also the online data collection as well. So the JFCS specialists and our social workers and counselors kind of worked alongside each other to implement some of those student assistance programs. So schools were encouraged to look at their data on a monthly basis and determine what supports and what type of direct skills need to be taught. We've expanded the community support and programming through the Trauma-Informed Primary Prevention Grant. So several of you guys have had the opportunity to attend those different monthly presentations or have maybe been able to read in our monthly newsletters about different resources and supports that are available in the community and how we're partnering with those community agencies. And then, of course, we've had the opportunity to offer several different professional development opportunities to different staff members and stakeholder groups around SEL. So here you can see our top 3, or the 3 or 10 of our top behavioral infractions. And so defiance, disrespect has been a number 1 referral for the past 3 years. We've also seen a disruptive behavior, minor aggressive acts, and those have been pretty consistent, not only in the past 3 years, but for several years. In regards to our top concerns this year, what we've seen across the board is the defiance and disrespect continues to be an area of concern. That is not unique to Scottsdale. So that is, if you look at most districts across the state, most districts across the country, what that number 1 referral is defiance and disrespect. So it's those low-level, behaviors that can be really frustrating to classroom teachers, or those non-teacher pleasing behaviors. And so again, number 1 way to address those behaviors is through teaching expected behaviors and really focusing on, PBIS and that tier 1. We've also seen disruption, appear in all 3 grade bands. And then, of course, with our, 9th through 12th graders, the 3rd most common behavior that we're seeing is that drug violation. So we have seen an increase in the vaping specifically. So some of the changes to the code this year that the team would like to recommend would be just minor language edits to add clarity to some different sections. The state now recognizes mental, behavioral health, and homelessness as excused absence codes. So want to update that. The addition of the HB 2123 language, which really kind of outlines, I guess, the response to what schools are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do in regards to students age 7 and under when it comes to out-of-school suspension or expulsion, and then in more general for kindergarten through 4th grade students. So we felt that that was important that we notify or at least acknowledge that through the code of conduct. We've added a statement to define progressive discipline because sometimes that can be an area of confusion or concern. We've made minor adjustments to disciplinary consequences to again, just make it more, positive to ensure that we're starting with that restorative practice. So again, we're teaching behavior the same way that we would academics. We've included threat assessment as part of our response to certain, not all, but level 2 infractions. So there are times where students may make a pretty significant error in judgment, but it's not always with the intent to harm others. Sometimes there is the intent to harm others. In order for us to respond in the most meaningful and appropriate way and ensure that we're supporting students, we've included that threat assessment. So a student who maybe is goofing around in a science class, accidentally lights the room on fire, looks very different from a student who intentionally lights a play structure on fire. So we wanted to make sure that we're really digging deep and having a better understanding of whether or not there is an intent to harm for some more of those serious infractions. And then the biggest one, which has been an ongoing conversation for several years, and the committee shared that we would come back and really kind of dive deeper into the dress code this year. And so we did. And this is, I think, the first time that we've really made a substantive change recommendation to the board. And so the feedback, especially from our students, has been that they would like to see us completely revise, the dress code. They want it to be more gender neutral. They want it to be, more supportive. They actually find, the dress code to be condescending. So when it says dress with, for success, their version of success might look very different from, their classroom teacher or their parent or a school administrator. And so they wanted to be accepted. And that, came across very clear, to the committee after working with Student Advisory Board and, getting their feedback and having the opportunity to listen, to other student concerns as well. And so the committee would like to recommend that we shift the dress code into 3 different areas. So what students must wear, what students may wear, and then what students cannot wear. So if you look here, students must wear clothes, right? They have to have their, private areas or their body covered. We are requiring that students wear school IDs. And this is a big one, but apparently, I guess slippers are a big thing this year. And there was some concern around the safety of slippers. And so our administrators would like to see students wear shoes with hard soles. And so that was added into a must wear. Students did not have any concern about that one, the hard soles. And I think that it was elementary, probably more than anybody, that really felt that, kids needed to wear hard soles and not slippers. Students may wear, and you can see here, the clothing with the images and logos, dresses, pants. I mean, it goes through hats, religious headwear, ripped jeans. So these are things that they can wear. They don't have to wear these things. But if this is how they, helps them feel comfortable and their version of, dressing to really, demonstrate who they are as individuals, they are allowed to wear these things. In regards to what students cannot wear, I think that what I really heard from students and then also, from staff members across the board is that, we want to focus on having a safe and supportive environment. And so we want to support students to be individuals. We want to, allow them to, feel as if they're accepted. But at the same time, not take away from the learning environment in regards to, something that would be offensive or, considered dangerous, right? So gang-related, clothing, anything with a hate speech, images of alcohol, drugs, paraphernalia, or anything that would be considered excessively violent would not be allowed to wear. So that was really the biggest, change that the committee is bringing forward to the board for consideration. And again, it was after a lot of thought, a lot of discussion. This is an ongoing discussion. I think every year, we have a conversation around dress code. We have very few dress code violations in the code of conduct, but it is something that, the students really feel that they need additional support or, understanding around. So in regards to next steps, the first, recommendation would be a process improvement. So the committee would like to start meeting in the fall. So that way changes can be made to the annual verification process and the student release form prior to registration. So we feel that we would capture more parents, acknowledging the code of conduct if we met, earlier or before registration. To prioritize data analysis and expand prevention strategies and behavioral intervention. So again, just continuing to look at our monthly data, our Arizona Youth Survey data, and then really targeting, interventions to meet the needs of what our data is speaking to. The consideration of a Tier 3 behavior program. So this is something that is not necessarily captured in our data, but with, kind of the, impact of COVID, and we've had a lot of, students that have maybe had different, learning experiences over the last couple of years, or, our youngest students who haven't had the opportunity to be in school or have those socialization opportunities. We've seen an increase in pretty significant externalizing behaviors from our youngest students. And these are students too where, not that we would ever want to go for, suspension right away, but there are times where the students may not be safe to be in a classroom with other students. And so we have to find a way to keep them safe, keep other students safe. And that can be very challenging, with limited resources on our campuses. And so one of the recommendations from the committee is to consider a Tier 3 behavior program for our youngest students. And those are the students right now that have caused some physical harm, to staff members. Because we haven't been able to separate them. And these are students without a disability. So it wouldn't necessarily be fair to maybe even recommend, that they move forward in that evaluation process. They really just need to learn how to be students and, be able to practice those skills in a gen ed, classroom. And so we'd like to make that recommendation for a Tier 3 behavior program. To continue to increase, training on trauma-informed practices. So we know that, oftentimes behavior manifests out of, survival strategies or coping strategies. We do see, the drug violation. So a lot of students may be, using substances as a way to cope. And so that trauma-informed practices, really having a better understanding of what that looks like. The de-escalation strategies and classroom management, that's where we really, capture those, students that are engaging in disruptive behavior in the classroom and that defiance and disrespect. And so, making sure, that our teachers, have the skills to be able to deal with those behaviors, on that day-to-day basis. And of course, we talk a lot about, PBIS and those school-wide systems, but making sure that, teachers feel confident, implementing the classroom system of PBIS into their individual classrooms. And the majority of those defiance and disrespect behaviors are coming from the classroom, which makes sense because that's where students spend the majority of their day. To continue to enhance the community partnerships and mentoring opportunities. So making sure, that we have opportunities to connect our students with more one-on-one or positive role models. Again, focusing on increasing those protective factors. And then something that I'm really excited about is in the fall, we will get our Arizona Youth Survey data. The 2022 data will be returned to us. So we'll be able to look at that and really have a better understanding of, some of those more at-risk behaviors or what is happening with our students and in the community to inform, additional recommendations or supports. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Board members, any questions? Vice President Dr. Hart-Wells.
Thank you, President Sanowski. Thank you, Ms. Crum, for the presentation, and to the committee for their continued work. I was glad to hear that there was robust input by students to the recommendation, particularly the dress code. I've sent you my comments on the dress code, and I stand behind those comments. I want to ask you about the threat assessment.
Yeah.
So the recommendation to include, the district already does the threat assessment, comprehensive threat assessment, my understanding, at Tier 3 or Level 3, the more severe infractions. But now incorporating that to Level 2, the whole concept behind these threat assessments, this happened after Sandy Hook, was to identify factors, right, in the environment of a student that risked to harm themselves or others. And so the suicide prevention policy amendments were to tether those opportunities with prevention strategies to go right at the heart, statistically, where those most severe consequences lay. So I'll leave it at that, but I think just providing information to the buildings, it doesn't in and of itself move the needle, but tethering it to these high-risk situations where oftentimes the SRO is involved appropriately, the social worker, the psychologist, those teams that come together do those threat assessments, that's where you're going to move the needle the most in mitigating, hopefully mitigating suicide risks. So thank you again for your work. I'll leave it at that. You have my comments on this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Dr. Hartwells. Board Member Greenberg, do you have any comments?
No, other than, listening to the Student Advisory Board, I know that making adjustments to the dress code was an important thing for them. And I appreciate that the district has listened to them and hopefully has addressed some of those concerns. And I appreciate, of course, always the changes to punishments are carried out, diversion programs, restorative justice. I think that's a very important aspect for our district.
Thank you, Board Member Greenberg. And I will also state that I believe these prevention strategies to be the target on where we need to be instead of being reactive, that we are actually helping students before they respond inappropriately at school. I think that helps students, it helps instruction, it helps parents, and it also helps our district public schools kind of shake a reputation when we look at the numbers of students that interact with one another every single day, sometimes in tight quarters. Disruptions are bound to happen, but I think there are things that we can put in place from more of a preventative standpoint that I actually look forward to your next presentation on the Wellness Committee, because there's a direct connection between this Code of Conduct and Wellness Committee in my mind. So if there are no more questions, we can move on to your presentation on the Wellness Committee update.
Right.
Thanks.
Hello again. All right. And thank you for that, because you're right. There are so many, connections between all of the different presentations I feel like I'm supporting tonight. And just even with the risk assessments and the threat assessments, I hear you. And absolutely, those recommendations are going to be included into those individual trainings, with respect to the different stakeholder groups. So thank you. So I'm honored again to be here to share with you an update in regards to the Wellness Committee. And so SUSD has a Wellness Committee, which is responsible for establishing and measuring the implementation of the district's wellness policy. Every 3 years, the committee gets together to really kind of dive deep and to evaluate the wellness policy. So the last time that was done was in 1920, and there was a pretty robust committee that got together, full of different stakeholder groups and experts from the community, very passionate, members of the community that had the opportunity to get together and create some recommendations or wellness guidelines. This year, we had another, wonderful group of committee members get together. And as you can see, we had, administrators from across the district, we had school nurses, different, teachers, stakeholder groups, and parents represented from each of our different learning communities. So this Wellness Committee, the 21-22 Wellness Committee, reviewed the Coordinated School Health Model, the CDC guidelines, the Governing Board policy, of course, the 1920 recommendations by the Wellness Committee, which is those wellness guidelines. And then we dove a little bit deeper into nutrition services, counseling and psychological services, school environment, and health services, since those tend to, well, I shouldn't say tend, but were an area of interest, especially as we are, kind of moving through this pandemic. There was a lot of focus and conversation around those areas. All right. And I'm just going to go like this, just for time purposes. So the previous committee spent a lot of time, updating the wellness guidelines. And so I think they came to the board in 1920 with a 28-page document.
Just to be clear, it's 2019, 2020, not 1920, which was 100 years ago.
But a very robust document. And they ended up, really kind of condensing it down to 11 pages. And in those 11 pages, they really outline, goals having to do with the promotion of nutrition, education, physical activities, SEL promotion, community awareness, and then how are we recruiting and sustaining staff that also, align and support these goals. They also took a look at, different school policies regarding school meal standards, the competitive food and beverage, food served on campuses, fundraising. So we've got so many different clubs and committees that, oftentimes want to come and sell candy bars or, bagels. So marketing, of the food and the beverages. So how are they, displaying healthy foods in a way that's attractive and makes, kids want to eat? We've also, had a lot of conversation around, public involvement and notifications, leadership. So how are we supporting, these policies and these recommendations on our campus? So the Wellness Committee is really committed to, the guidance from the Healthy Generation. And what that means is that this committee, continued to look at, the work of the previous committee and those recommendations and made sure that, we're traveling down that journey and having conversation around, what are our needs right now and are they captured in that wellness document? What do we need to revise? What needs to be changed in order to meet, the current needs of our community? We also wanted to make sure that, the Wellness Committee is committed to using that whole school, whole community, and whole child model. So not only are we just, considering the nutrition needs of our students, but, sharing information with parents on, how to prepare healthy meals, making sure that parents have access to resources for free health care or dental care or, social, emotional, mental health supports. How are we providing this information to our administrators? So they're involved in, creating a healthy campus, right? We've got, a lot of celebrations that happen on campus, and food tends to be a staple at some of those celebrations. So how are we, looking at those different events and activities to really support, the wellness of our students versus, and the whole child, I should say. And so this committee, we started meeting in March, and, like I said, we reviewed all of those different documents, had a conversation around, what was needed, spent a lot of time talking about, the work of the previous committee. And what we learned, through, the conversation and, different presentations is that the work of the previous committee has not really had the opportunity to be implemented with Fidelity. There were so many restrictions, that happened during COVID, and so many, limitations, that were in place. And so, Patty, who's sitting back here, and feel free to chime in, didn't have, access to the same types of, food that she would normally have. And so maybe, the menus haven't been as robust. So again, just a lot of, different restrictions have been put in place. We've also seen a need, for increased social emotional support and awareness. So the previous, document describes the role of the social worker to really support our McKinney-Vento students. And that has changed. We have been able to, again, increase the number of social workers and SEL support across the district. So that needed to be updated. But really, in regards to, moving forward, and this is, again, just kind of more of a yearly update versus, us evaluating, the recommendation of this Wellness Committee is to honor the work of the previous, committee and to go back and reteach, those guidelines to our schools and support our schools in implementing the recommendations. We also feel that we have learned, some things that can be shared with schools or continued during COVID. So, we want to continue to encourage schools to think about creative ways to celebrate birthdays or parties, without having to bring in food, right? So we've got a lot of students with pretty significant allergies or food restrictions. And so if we can say, hey, you've got 5 extra minutes of recess or 10 extra minutes of recess, or here's a menu of different choices. Like there's so many ways that we can, I guess, really kind of move away from, the giant cupcakes and the candy, to support wellness and, other areas of wellness as well. So we feel like that is something that we learned, during COVID, is that our students will be okay without some of those, birthday treats. And there's a lot of other, kind of fun ways to get them talking and moving and up around and meeting new friends that, we could encourage that. So we've talked about, having a back-to-school training, where, this information will be provided to our administrators so they can share it, with their teachers, to provide them with, a menu of options. So teachers don't have to come up with it on their own. They've got options given to them, and they could say, hey, you know what, I like these 5. I'm willing to, share these 5 with my classroom parents. We have a support services newsletter that goes out, monthly. Our back to school one will have a wellness blog, in it too, where we can share information with parents and encourage them, to, ways to be active, with their kids and, cook fun, healthy meals together. Think about, again, ways to celebrate that may not involve, sending in birthday treats or, classroom treats. And so we also talked about ways to, make sure that this information is easily accessible, to our community. So we have a lot of really great information, and sometimes it's really hard, to get out there. And so, the committee and the parents especially said, I don't always pay attention to stuff that comes from the district. I pay more attention to stuff that comes from my principal, but I pay the most attention to stuff that comes directly from my classroom teacher. And so that was a lesson learned and an area that we can, build upon and make sure that, these monthly newsletters are going to, principal secretaries and ask them to share it with, classroom teachers. And so when classroom teachers are pushing out those weekly newsletters, they can include this as well. And we feel like perhaps, again, if it's coming from the classroom teacher, more people are going to have access to it. So I guess in summary, our recommendation is really to implement the previous recommendations or guidelines with Fidelity, and then incorporate the lessons learned through COVID to really kind of strengthen wellness on our campuses and in the community. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Board members, questions? Vice President Dr. Harwells.
Thank you, President Snowski. So this is perhaps a dumb question. Do we have a nutritionist on staff? We do. Yes. The leader of Team Awesome, please come to the podium.
Thank you for that question. It's great to be able to answer a yes to that. We do have Brian Hannell, who is a registered dietitian. He's also a product of Scottsdale Schools, so that's also a big woohoo. We also have our menu planner. She may not have her RD because she hasn't gone through the internship as a new mom. She really can't take a year off work, but she does have her bachelor's degree in nutrition and dietetics. So we have 2 strong individuals in our menu planning team that keep us on the right track, do our menu planning, and also help us with all of our special diets for our medically fragile children.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Do you know if the athletics department uses a nutritionist at all to maybe not just overall eating, but directed to anabolic steroid use, different other aspects of wellness in the context of athletics?
Right. And I was going to say Dr. Sackos.
Excellent question. So there is a lot of health and wellness information within Register My Athlete, RMA, that students must take in order to participate in our AIA or sanctioned sports. I believe our middle school may do it as well, but definitely our high school. So they go through things, anti-bullying, drug use, a lot of different things to stay healthy and healthy decision-making.
Okay, so but outside of that, yes, we've gone through those videos. In addition to the concussion training and all of that's in there, yes. But outside of that, the teams, the students at the high school level maybe don't have a one-on-one with your nutritionist at any point, or, okay.
Yeah,
all right.
there is no interaction with nutrition services and athletics at this point.
Okay, not yet. Okay, very good. Okay, great, thank you so much. Last question. What I am hearing is that we might need to recalibrate what wellness looks like today. Do you think that that's a fair conclusion based off of the committee's discussion?
Okay, yeah, I absolutely agree that that is a fair conclusion. And I think, well, the very first meeting, we had, all of the committee members kind of share what their definition of wellness was and why, they were interested in being on the committee. And it was really interesting because there was a lot of people said, I'm really interested in nutrition, or I'm very interested in the social emotional, but there was that crossover between, you have to really be eating, healthy in order to feel good, and then to work on other areas of perhaps mental health or, the school environment, right? And so, and one of the things that we know from working with some of our students that have been, hospitalized for different mental health issues, one of the very first things that they do work on is, nutrition and diet, because they feel that a student has to be balanced and, properly, have, solid nutrition and drinking enough water to be in a place to really even be able to take in, some of the different lessons. So I think that there's a lot of crossover, and especially since, there is that heightened awareness or focus on, mental health and social emotional learning. Our conversations definitely were very robust in that area.
Okay. I'll just ask that you keep in mind as you proceed through the implementation, where there are amendments that need to be made in the policy to perhaps expand the scope of what that policy really addresses. It seemed to me to be written largely as a result of the USDA and the federal requirement to have a wellness policy. But today we're looking at wellness in a little bit different light, appropriately so, I think actually. That's a good thing, and whether we need to be thinking about recalibrating the policy as a whole. So I would just ask you to keep that in mind as you move forward with the committee.
Thank you.
And I appreciate that comment, Dr. Hartwells, because when we talk about the intersections of wellness, your previous one on code of conduct and some of the issues that our students are experiencing, can you go back to slide 7, please, with the visual up there? I think that's it's a great visual. Well, you try to pull it, there we go, I'll just talk about it. So I think we do a really good job on the right side, right there. I think we do a really good job of that first community part, right? And we're working on the social emotional climate. We've started to really recognize the value of that in assisting students to learn. But I feel our big growth opportunities really include employee wellness, family engagement, community involvement, and health education. And Dr. Hartwells made the comment about our group of our students, our athletes, and health education. I think that's something that all of our students could benefit from. And I know it was finances that made our whole public school system re-examine the availability of health education. It kind of became like a frill. Yet I think health education is one of the most important factors because it does include nutrition. It deals with stress management. And this is not just about our students. This is about our employees. And we forget that in our schools, but we're also a big employer. So we need the employees in order to have our students be successful. I look for more of those ones that I mentioned of coming forth, not forgetting the others. And I love the idea of instead of cupcakes, you get extra playtime. I think that's perfect, because then you're not rewarding kids with food, which is a bad health habit. So this is something I look forward to. I would like for us to continue to look at, instead of thinking of health education as something extra, but seeing it as primary to the learning and well-being of our students and staff. So I rushed through that because of time, because I know I'm in between this and a break. But those things are super important, I think, to our student success and our employees feeling valued as well.
And I do know time is of an issue, but I do want to make a comment to that, President Snowski, is the nutrition services side of this is pretty locked and loaded. There was a lot of effort put into that. We're ready to go. We're ready to implement now that we're coming out of a pandemic. We're back into a quote-unquote normal year, whatever that may look like. We are here, but I do think that it was the integrity or what the committee is looking at for next year is focusing on those other areas that have actually, through the pandemic, have bubbled to the top is something I think that we need to look at as a whole here in our district, and I think that that is what the focus will be next year. Nutrition services, it's ready to go.
Yay, thank you. Thank you both for that presentation. Board Member Greenberg, do you have anything to add quickly?
Just really quickly here, the one thing I will say, you did bring up the work of the prior committee. I do really respect the work and the groundwork they laid for this current committee. I think, to be totally honest, I think a number of the previous committee members were a little upset that a new committee had been formed and they hadn't been given the opportunity to, I know everybody was given the opportunity to apply, but as you said, a lot of our parents and community members do not necessarily read district communications, but may read only what comes from their principal or directly to them from staff members, teachers, and the like. And so I think a lot of them missed that opportunity to apply and would like in some way in the future to be informed of when those opportunities arise again, because they enjoyed the work they were doing. They brought a lot of institutional knowledge there. And maybe if there was some way to include them in future discussions that you have planned, I think that they would really appreciate that.
Thank you, Board Member Greenberg.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll absolutely take that into consideration.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, with that, thank you guys. Before we get into the communications and marketing update, how about we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah, I would call this a wellness break.
Let's take a wellness break. And we will reconvene at 8:13. We reconvene this meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District Governing Board. Today is June 14th. The time is 8:14 p.m. And we are going to continue with our discussion and information items, and we are on item G, Communications and Marketing Update. Steve, would you like to introduce our speaker?
I just want to say that I am so excited about this next presentation, and it will be a little bit longer than the 10 minutes we try to keep the presentations to, but there's so much good news to share with respect to what's going on in our communications and marketing department, and I'm really glad that Christine Harrington is leading the team, and I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you. Well, good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Menzel and Gladys, members of the public. Thank you for being here tonight and for the opportunity for us to share our marketing efforts. Of course, our mission is very simple. It's to share with the community who we are and what we do here in Scottsdale. And while we communicate with many different groups for many different reasons, students are at the heart of all we communicate and celebrate. What I'd like to do is just very quickly introduce our team. So if you guys just want to stand up, Lainey Triplett, she oversees our website, and she works closely with all of our site web authors and directors, and they're all clapping because they appreciate her efforts in making sure their information gets updated. Nancy Norman is our communications specialist. She's been a rock star, as you all know, and just master communicator. And then Samantha Schnoes, she's new. She just joined us. She's our social media specialist. She joined us just right after graduating from ASU, so we're super lucky to have her on board. And Victor, where's Victor? Oh, okay. Victor, he's our photographer, graphic designer, and he's a parent too. So Nancy was also a parent. So we have a lot of different hats. I'm a parent myself in the district. So a lot of different lenses to look through. And I appreciate them because we've really upped the ante. Not only because we have a great narrative to share, but then additionally coming out of COVID, it's just really imperative that we get out there, we focus, on the instructional leaders, the teaching and learning that's happening at our sites, and that we get pictures of all of that magic. So not only we tell our story, but folks can see it and hopefully even feel it when they have a chance to get back out to our campuses. I am going to go through this very quickly. You can slow me down or at the end just ask me questions, but I want to share with you our communications matrix. These are the groups that are considered in each and every communication that we distribute. Sometimes the message goes across all channels into all groups, and other times the intended audience is much more narrow in scope, but we recognize the audience is much larger than those who already choose to work here or are enrolled with us. Here's a look at the stakeholder group. This community group is quite large, lots of subgroups that range from business leaders to retirees. A lot of these communications, of course, are aided by our sites, and we heard that earlier. The greatest communication is from our teachers and from our site leaders, and we are partners with them in that, of course, but that cooperation is key. The accuracy and consistency is truly what goes a long way toward building trust and a strong community support. Parents and prospective parents are a group unto themselves because so much of what we do relies on our communication with our current parents especially. Clearly, the district plays a very large role in that with newsletters and surveys and social media and the website. But truly, again, a lot of this happens at the site. Again, our strong working relationship with the sites pays dividends, especially when it comes to crisis communications. We know that our site leaders are focused first and foremost on the safety of their students and their staff, and so that's when we will absolutely insert ourselves to serve them, help assist them with any sort of robocalls, or additionally finesse any sort of follow-up information that needs to be had by parents. A new tool to us now in the district is Remind. Now, we already had thousands of users in our district, and so we wanted to honor that. They were all using the free version. Many very quickly realized that they now had access to some of the premium features. But this is a great tool, especially for the adult student conversation. We don't want text messaging. We like that this be a district-controlled form of communication, so this is the expectation, especially with, we have coaches and club sponsors and stuff, and that some of them are maybe not the full-time classroom teacher. We want to make sure that we have a good handle on this for the safety and security of our staff and our students. And so we'll be doing training on this in July. Employees, this is, again, a number of different employee groups. Depending on who the group is, we maybe communicate a little differently, but all of them receive weekly newsletters. And we're looking forward now to getting back out to our sites even more, and especially for more public events and being able to feature that, really continue to build relationships with our teachers and our site leaders, because we know those are our greatest brand ambassadors. So we want to make sure that they are armed with accurate information and a strong understanding always as to our why. Media, we're making a concerted effort to really improve on our earned media and to grow that, and then additionally improve our school calendars so that we can highlight any public events and make sure that our media is aware of those opportunities to go out and showcase what we have happening on our campuses. The best sort of media, of course, is that which is earned, and we have a number of local reporters here with a strong focus on education, so there's a great opportunity to always share our story with a much wider audience. We also buy advertising and send out mailers strategically throughout the year to announce new program offerings, to attract families for tours, and ultimately to enroll. The SUSD source really is what I'm most proud of. I'm really excited about this, especially as it just continues to attract more and more eyes. We've already had over 14,000 unique page views since it launched in the last 3 months. So really excited, and want to thank all of our directors and cabinet that have really helped get on board with these blogs, because I believe this is such a great tool for our community. It's a clearinghouse of information, provides an opportunity for us to really tackle trending topics that a very simple newsletter did not provide before. Plus, it's always there. So like Gifted Showcase, whatever you're Googling as a parent or a prospective parent, you're going to be able to find some of those tips and tools and offerings. I think about like what Shannon was able to lend last month after the unfortunate school shooting in Texas, and some of those very important ways that we can help our families cope and work through some of these tragedies. It's a great tool, and has really become a powerful landing page for our families and our community as a whole. Niche, this is new this year. This spring, we launched our new profile on Niche, which enables us to connect with highly engaged prospective families who are actively researching schools like ours. We had 523 people click on our profile in May, and 3 of them scheduled tours, and 9 of them clicked to apply. So those are pretty great numbers. And what I love about this traffic and the traffic that is generated here is we know that these are families that are actively searching schools, so they're not passive or they wouldn't be on Niche. So this is exciting. And the other thing about being a partner with them is the enhanced opportunities for advertising. So, for example, we have enhanced enrollment marketing solutions where we can advertise on other school districts and other schools that are maybe not partners, that we have either identified as peers or competitors, but they cannot advertise on us. Additionally, we can retarget and market. So if we know somebody was looking at, Shelley, I'll pick you, Pueblo, we can continue to go back and make sure that they, again, check out Pueblo or any of our other SUSD schools. So it's a good opportunity to continue to remain top of mind there. And these are some of those ads that you'll see that will pop up as part of that marketing retargeting strategy. You may have heard, we're celebrating 125 years, and we're very proud of our history here. And so when I started, just December 3rd, we hit the ground running with this. Of course, have a logo, and we had light pole banners designed and a number of hashtags that we've been rolling out, of course, in support of this celebration. I spent winter break at the library and with some local historians, and this was super fun. I think I should write a book someday about Scottsdale. But
really enjoyed digging into the digital archives. We've just barely scratched the surface. This is going to be oncoming fun facts that we get to share, for weeks and months and maybe years ahead. But it's really interesting to learn sort of who we are, harken back to the past, and how it's informed who we are now and who we will be in the future. As part of this effort, we rolled out on our website 125 years. So again, it's our history and in sort of a story form here. We've also rolled out our legacy of success, and building this out is really exciting. It's essentially a directory of our alumni, and ultimately, I believe, a great networking tool for students to recognize the real-world application of what they're learning in the classroom, and hopefully reach their potential by seeing what's possible and what others who have come through our schools have gone on to achieve. And so you'll be able to go on here and sort and search by industry, and then see for yourself who's come through our schools and is successful in our community. We also want to highlight those alumni as part of our legacy of success and alumni spotlights that we're rolling out weekly. And we'll continue to reflect on this foundation of who we, again, were and who we are and will be by celebrating these folks that are making a difference in our community in a number of different ways and their legacy of success moving forward. And so we continue to call on other alumni to come forward, fill out our survey, self-identify, share with us, what it is that has made them who they are today, or a teacher or somebody who inspired them here. Again, looking back to winter break. So got here, got excited, rolled out a bunch of media about the 125 years right out of the gate. And this was 2 weeks and a pretty intensive push over that 2 weeks, but we wanted to target families where we believed they were, which was down at the train park enjoying lights, or at Papago for zoo lights, the malls, the airport. We really wanted to focus in on where we would be able to find families. And again, focusing on the demographic that has school-age children, ages 3 to 16. Come February, we really ramped it up, and we launched a landing page for our marketing efforts. And it feels maybe a little familiar to you. We don't want to depart, obviously, too much from our website, but it's essentially a streamlined version of it. And this is clickable, but you could go through and see for yourself all the different elements on there. And through this, just in the month of April, we had 27 tours scheduled. So again, there's a lot of interest, and I think we're reaching the right demographic, but this allows us to capture some of who these folks are so that we can follow up with them later. So that's what's been fun to see about this, understanding what really maybe piques somebody's interest. These digital ads, display, behavioral ads, and then additionally social media ads have been running out, again, between, 2 weeks in December, but mostly just this 2022 year. And they've been primarily focused in zip codes associated with our district, but those zip codes stretch far beyond our boundaries. So in many cases, it's almost to the 51. It's, North Scottsdale and beyond, south of the 202. So we're really targeting a much larger group, but again, those families with school-age children. What's cool about this is the name of the game for us is just over-deliver and outperform. We've been really impressed with how these campaigns have performed and how they continue to gain traction. So for example, our display ads have far surpassed what the industry average is. So the industry average click-through rate would be 0.08%, and we've doubled that. So we're 0.16. So that's exciting. Our social media in April delivered 724 clicks. It was 0.69% click-through rate. Again, more than double the month before. So I highlight that number because it's great to see the interest continue to gain traction here. We're also running Google search ads, and so these are really important keyword searches. So again, these would be families that are actively searching schools. And again, we are over-delivering and outperforming industry averages by, nearly twice the average. We're also sort of all about the 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4, 5, 6 punch, and finding families wherever it is that they are. So running thematic ads, running sort of similar email campaigns, sometimes a direct mailer, additionally earned media, a lot of different places that you'll find similar messaging, and that's true of the Coronado learning community. So since spring, we've been very focused on remarketing the Coronado learning community as part of its restructure. In addition to noticing, of course, just the public hearing that you all held regarding elementary school boundaries, we also sent this particular mailer to households with children. So this went to 3,170 homes. And we also designed a Coronado learning community page on our website, so you understand what that trajectory looks like in the different offerings with each of those schools. And it's so great we did it 4 more times for our other learning communities, and those continue to be pages that we will further develop with more pictures and more photo galleries and more good nuggets. Now, we also launched Coronado specific social media ads. These went live April 26th. And this campaign has really been the shining star, honestly, of a lot of our efforts, delivering 73% of all the social clicks, again, in the month of May, 41% click-through rate. And this has been very targeted, so looking at schools, geo-targeting our schools, additionally, competitors, peers, and places we know families go, the Boys and Girls Club, Papago Park, and the zoo. We've pushed into South Scottsdale and parts of Tempe. So again, I've lost track. I don't know if this is the 3rd, 4th, or 5th punch, but we're rolling out email marketing, and this is, next to the source, this is probably my second favorite thing because it really provides us the opportunity to tell our story. It's so much better than just an ad, if you ask me. But this 3-part series has also morphed into a 6-part series because I just can't help ourselves. We have so much good stuff to talk about. So what started with us being world-class future focused, and then the second one focused on academics, arts, and athletics. This third one is on our newly STEM certified schools, the Math and Science Academy. We'll be rolling out one on dual language immersion, on IB, and then on safety and security just ahead of the new year, welcoming families back, letting them know how we're here to support them. And okay, again, super cool. This email, each of them goes to 77,000 inboxes of households with children. Again, almost to the 101, well, to the 101, but almost to the 51, south of the 202, up through North Scottsdale, and parts of Phoenix. Finally, this email campaign delivered over 4,000 clicks. This third one only just went out today, so can't tell you what this third one's done. But so far, 4,000 clicks, and we're viewed over 30,000 times. So people are interested in our story. And again, that far outpaces the industry average. The industry average open rate is 12%. So our 20% is good news. We're also drafting an email campaign to go out to Arizona Parenting and the Raising Arizona Kids emails, because those are clearly parents that are engaged and care about our schools, and they have to subscribe. And so they have not opted out, and this is the kind of storytelling I think they're looking for and will resonate with them. That is a much wider audience, of course, but it's another opportunity for us to own our story and share the good things that we have happening here in our district. We're also rolling out radio ads. I don't have those yet for you to hear, but I will share them when I get them. I was hoping I would have my STEM ads to drop in here yet, and I apologize, so this is not positioned quite right on here, but nonetheless, as part of that most recent STEM email that went out, we have a website page for our STEM certified schools with photo galleries that link back to the school websites with all the information that they offer on the academics at their schools. And we will be rolling out STEM social and display ads as well. I mentioned dual language immersion. If you all saw the article in the progress, we have some earned media on dual language immersion. And additionally, that will be the next email that goes out. And this is a preview of some of those ads that will be coming as well. In the last 6 months, we've been very intentional about what we post on social media, and it's paid off. Facebook is up 397% our reach, and on Instagram, 2,200%. And we've further utilized that growing audience by promoting some of our job listings and the opportunities that exist to come join our SUSD family, and also to share some fun facts that just hopefully really resonate and share what it is to be part of the SUSD family, what our culture, our values are. Now, we rely on the National School Public Relations Association book for our calendar of social media. So, every day is something being celebrated on social media, but this is the guidelines that we follow. It's when we celebrate teachers and principals and the like thereof, and additionally, CTE month in February, and we've had a lot of fun with this. It gave us a great reason to get out to our campuses and get some pictures of the different unique programming that exists. That looks far different than when I was in school, that's for sure. So this is a great tool for us moving forward, and especially as it relates to Hootsuite. So this is very light, I'm sorry about that. But social maturation and governance is critical to our success in this arena, and Hootsuite is a massive tool that allows for a lot of calendaring, scheduling, creating of templates for our site leaders to use as well as they engage their community. So we want to ensure first that only certain people are the voice of the district. And so whether it's a principal or their designee, or if it is, somebody at the district, the communications department, or again, a designee posting on behalf of the district, Hootsuite is that secure platform that is accessed through single sign-on. So it's easier for us to control, and it doesn't have to be tied to somebody's personal Facebook page anymore. That is, I think our site leaders will appreciate that. So we look forward to analytics additionally that we'll be able to glean from this, because we know every different sort of audience is going to have a different pattern when it comes to when they're engaging the most on social media. It might be that when you're idling, waiting for pickup at 2:30 or 3 at an elementary school, that's when it's going to be the time that we see the biggest uptick. And so we'll be able to be thoughtful then about when we're posting at our different sites. So the really neat thing about this is this tool is as powerful as the users are motivated to use it. And we're really excited about that and have some upcoming training. Most excited that since Sam has been here and reached out to principals and generated sort of the automatic login information, some of those have just hit the ground running. It's really intuitive. And so we'll have the baseline training, of course, available live or virtual, and then it'll be available on demand. And then sort of the next level. So for our super users, if you will, there will be that additional level of training, and that will also be happening in July. And in light of all these efforts and bringing more eyes to our websites, again, we are doing the best we can to really showcase what's happening inside our classrooms. And so we've been going out, grabbing photos. I think Victor was at like 28 places in 2 weeks' time. We're just running around getting as much as we can to highlight the good things that are happening. So here you can see Ingleside as an example. This was the first one we did, where if you recall, you've all been your parents too, so you've been on our website, and the schools just kind of had the structure, that is their building. And we have no idea what's going on inside there, right? So we have that still structure there for About Us, but then academics, arts, and it scrolls through. So you really get to see and hopefully get a feeling for the good things that are happening, and then building out what academics is, for example, at Ingleside. So we're working with principals, meeting with each of them one-on-one to figure out, again, what their differentiators are and what some of their highlights are as we work to update all the school fact sheets and pamphlets that exist out there and have them geared up and ready for the new year and for all the tours that are coming, right? Part of our story, a critical part, is school funding, and it's super complicated. But given that we are funded by the state and generous stakeholders in our community, we thought it is very critical that they understand this part of our story. And so I know Shannon laughs because I check for understanding more often than I probably should. But it's a lot, and I want to make sure that we're able to clarify it not only for us, but for our community. So this is something that we just recently rolled out, and I think the hope is that this will help build trust and transparency moving forward. If people really understand the budgeting process, the different buckets that the dollars fall in, and the restrictions that exist with some of those dollars, then some of the conversations will be easier maybe down the road. And we'll have more town halls this fall with regard to our district additional assistance override, again, as part of this education campaign. As our strategic planning wraps up, now our focus shifts to communicating and measuring, ultimately reporting out the strides we make moving forward. Here's just sort of a preview of what that plan will look like, and of course it will live on our website. And then we've also ordered folders that look very much like this, but don't say strategic plan. And what we intend to do is have one side stocked full of all the great district information. So community ed, you name it, all the great information on the district side. And then we're going to send it out to our departments for, new hires or for job fairs or for tours to the schools. And then they can load it up on their side with whatever it is that they have from the site and stickers to put in and sort of own their side of the folder. But at the end of the day, we are a unified school district, and it's important that prospective families, especially if they visit a site and they're just not feeling it, we want them to know about our other schools. And again, understand what the trajectory looks like. So if you do choose this school, what that next level looks like. So I think it's a very important part of our story, and we're going to work very diligently and intentionally to share that with new teachers. I'm going to attend their orientation so that they can know a part of, understand our narrative, and then additionally the offerings. If you're at one site, you're often in a silo, and we have so much happening that we want to make sure we loop all in. We also are going to launch new tour surveys. So this was a pretty impressive number. I saw, especially given that we haven't had families on our campuses for a while, there's maybe pent-up demand. We had 1,028 tour requests so far in 2022. So, of course, we don't know that those are all new families. They might be folks checking out the middle schools, right? Looking at what that next level looks like. But it's as much about recruitment, or it's as much about retainment as it is recruitment. All of these efforts, those email campaigns and everything else, we want to make sure that this is resonating as much with the families we have, with the employees we have, as it is with those prospective families. So we think it's really important to know what piqued somebody's interest, why they chose to check us out. It's equally important to know why they chose to withdraw. And so we have the parent exit surveys as well. And all of that will inform our mission and how we, engage with the community moving forward. So if I say it here, then I have to do it. So I'm saying it. We're bringing this baby back. I'm so excited about this magazine. I loved it when we first brought it out, back in, I guess it was like 2015. And we're going to bring it back. The goal is twice a year, and it would be mass saturation. I think it's important that not just households with children understand our narrative, but additionally all of those who support us and maybe have an opportunity to somehow partner with us moving forward. So that is what I am also now looking most forward to this fall. And we're working, as I said, on the radio ads, bus ads, and the school fact sheets, marketing plans and requests for our schools, trying to do the best we can to streamline and improve systems that maybe already exist, but how we can improve upon those moving forward. That's our focus area right now. So
Is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
Wow.
That's it. So I tried to talk fast to respect your time, but it's really exciting work, and I'm really proud of this team that's stepped up. And again, all of our directors, because I think the blogs are going to be really meaningful and impactful moving forward, and great tools for our parents, because they're partners in the education of their students.
Wow. Spectacular. Governing board members, comments, questions? Vice President Dr. Harwells.
Thank you, President Snowski, and thank you, Team Awesome 2.0 Communications. I appreciate that you are adding the funding component to the website. I think that's very important, particularly as we go into the DAW override in the fall. One quick question, Soul, will they have a website?
So yes, we need to work on Soul. And that is definitely something we're going to do moving forward with Nick Noonan when he returns to town. So I've already sent some emails his way, and those were conversations we started, in fact, last spring with Tim, and we want to move forward, and that would maybe be another email campaign. That would maybe be another rollout of it with a similar strategy attached. There is, I think we've found that while online learning is not for all, it is the perfect fit for some. And so we really want to highlight what the opportunity is here in our district, because you are not sacrificing opportunity or rigor, rather just the constraints of the classroom.
I appreciate that, and I agree firmly with that conclusion. It may not be for all, but it most certainly does serve a demographic, and we do have families that are in that demographic. And I would hope that you would also speak with those families and those parents. The ones I've spoken with have been very supportive and grateful for the education that their students are getting, but still allowing them, say, to travel to competitions around the country for swimming or so to speak.
Dr. Sakos and I have had that same conversation, sort of the profile of a learner and what the opportunities are that come along with that particular approach to learning.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the hard work. This is really, it's exciting, and I love your enthusiasm and your attitude towards it.
Oh, I have the best job in the world. But I will tell you, the one thing I neglected to say, while we are doing social media ads on our own platforms for jobs, we are also looking to roll out some additional ads, and it is interesting because we're not the only ones recruiting and not the only industry. So while everybody's dealing with the Great Resignation, we already had a shortage, a very tight sort of teacher talent marketplace for sure. And so we are rolling that out, but it is interesting because the budget is much higher because all those keywords are being used everywhere. And so we're all sort of bidding for the same eyes, but we are rolling those out as well, and hopefully we'll generate, more staff.
Board Member Lindsay.
With all the tours, has there been any talk of training the principals for consistency of the tours? Because I know they vary from site to site.
So they do, that's my understanding. And what I'd like to do is go on some tours myself, honestly, and have a number of us go out and experience it. But we have talked about, as part of the marketing toolkit for principals, to include that. And also I've thought about bringing principals together, or at least offering the opportunity, almost for like PLCs, but having to do with communications, where they can learn from each other's best practices. Because there's some really great stuff that's already happening out there. And, I'll mention Sequoia, I don't think she'll mind. But what they do for their kindergarten roundup is afterwards, then they invite all those families out for a play date. And it doesn't, cost them anything more than like an Otter Pop. And then you generate, as soon as the parents click and the kids are comfy on the playground, you have way fewer tears the first day of school and those kinds of things. And so there's opportunities, I think, to even learn from each other. And tours are a really great example of that. If you've toured college campuses, you know that the person who goes on, that takes you on that tour, they live and breathe, that, cardinal and gold or whatever the colors are of that school. And so I think that it's not always the counselor or the principal. You have to really determine who is best suited to do that tour. And those are things that we'll work on, going into the new year.
Great question. Board Member Greenberg, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so first of all, this is such a significant improvement on previous years in terms of quality of materials that we're putting out there, quality of advertisements, quality of our school websites. It's far more inviting to parents when they're able to see students in action, all the lab work that the students do. So I have to say I'm very impressed by that. And insofar as the data that you have provided, I think in terms of brand recognition, clearly people are looking at our content and we're getting our name out there to the broader community. What I do have a question about, though, is the goal here of converting, getting someone who doesn't go to our district, whether they live in district or out of district, coming to our district. And you had mentioned something about 27 tours and 1,028 tours. Can you explain the connection of those tours between our the connection between or connection from our marketing efforts to individuals taking those tours, and to the greatest extent possible, any conversions from that?
Yes, thank you for the question. So of the 1,000 tours, they could have come to us any number of ways. So sometimes directly to the school website. We've added tour links in a lot of places. So also on the enrollment page, also, on a IB page maybe, for example, but we've put opportunities to tour in lots of places, not just on the school pages, which is where they primarily were. In addition to that, on our landing page that was rolled out specifically for marketing purposes, which is what all of those ads link to, and that is where in 1 month we had 23 requests for tours. Now, that means somebody put in their name and their email address for us to follow up and schedule that tour, in addition to their school-age children, what ages and what school they're interested in touring. So we're able to ascertain that information and then follow up. So now what I want to do is go back and see, are any of these folks in Synergy, did we get them? Did they enroll in the site? And hopefully the tour survey will help inform, if not, then why? And then we'll be able to redirect. So we've got their contact information. If they just didn't, if they went to Anasazi and they were looking for Mandarin, well, I don't want to lose them forever. Let's redirect. And so the follow-up is the most critical part of this effort now. Otherwise, the effort falls flat.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that there's actually kind of two things. One, you've optimized our site in terms of placing tour links in multiple locations, whereas previously they were a little more difficult to find. This is a lot more user-friendly. They can find them elsewhere. On the marketing side, you've developed a standard landing page to help us track when somebody sees an ad and they click on that link, whether it's on social media or in an email blast or what have you. That then directs them to this landing page, and that allows us to see how many people are then moving to tours, and hopefully we can then kind of capture how many of those lead to actual conversions in terms of registering in our district. Would that be a fair assessment?
Correct, and I recognize what's intuitive for me might not be for you. So I'm a big believer in just putting it everywhere in as many different places so it's easy for the user to eventually find what it is that they're looking for. Niche just occurred to me. That's another place that has been driving a lot of traffic to our website, and additionally providing another opportunity for prospective families or even current families that are maybe just looking for whatever that next level is to tour one of our schools. So the follow-up and the follow-through is going to be most important here, and we look forward to seeing what more we can learn about this.
For individuals who don't necessarily click through the links, but instead may see our advertisements on Facebook and personally go and Google us and sign up for a tour through that method, do we have, when they're signing up for those tours, a thing that says, and it looked like we do based on your second to last slide, but do we have something that says, how did you hear about us? Social media, word of mouth, email blast. Are we capturing that so that we know that, the money we're spending on the, paid for ads and what have you are panning out for us?
We will make sure that that is captured everywhere, and additionally in our enrollment applications. That's something that we've discussed as well, that we want to have that question there that asks, why Scottsdale?
Okay, that's good. I think that's really, for me, when it comes to marketing, on top of having high quality materials that demonstrates we do care about this and we do care about our district and we have a reputation here. I think making sure we're able to track that pathway as best as we can. Obviously, it's not perfect, but as best as we can, from viewing marketing materials to registering, I think that'll show us how effective we are here. So that's great that we're going to add that. My final question is you know, in our marketing work, are we collecting the recruiting information and looking at what our competitors are doing to see, you know, how we compare? If we do look at some of these metrics you have provided about impressions or clicks, do we have any way of evaluating, you know, what other schools may be able to accomplish?
So I just came back from my ASPR conference, and it really runs the gamut, and this is very difficult to track outside of knowing sort of what the level of impressions were or the click-throughs. Ultimately, if a family decides to enroll or not, it's sometimes tough to say this 1 + 1 = 2, right? But what I can tell you is that we are absolutely ramping up interest and sharing our story. And if you're talking about a charter school or a private school versus a public school, it runs the gamut. Some of the very glossy, you know, catalogs, honestly, that exist out there are quite different. But I think if you feel, you know, what I feel when we're walking around on our campuses, that's the intangible that we're really after. So we're really going to be most thoughtful in where we spend our money and how we target the right audience moving forward. And the marketing material, as far as what's out there that others share, it really runs the gamut. But I have to say, not just because I work here, but I've been most impressed with these efforts. And of course, the work that's done at the site that makes our job really easy.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I do appreciate, as I said earlier, you know, it isn't a perfect art form, and I know it's difficult to track. You know, we can't say with 100% certainty A led to B and B led to C, but I do appreciate the efforts to try and track that as best as possible so that we can get a better gauge a little bit more how that spend on ads and marketing materials is translating into, you know, new enrollment. So thank you very much. I don't have any further questions. I've taken up enough time, and great job again to your team. I think it's such a significant improvement from what I saw when I first joined the board. I think the focus here is great, and your team is just awesome as always.
Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Greenberg, and I will reiterate that. Thank you to your team. I love that you're back with us, Christine Harrington, and the support that you provide, not just to your immediate team, but to our district is fantastic. So keep up the good work. Yay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, please.
So again, thank you, Christine. The other thing that wasn't mentioned, but I think it's important to point out, that we do collect information on families that leave, and that gets reviewed on a monthly basis with Dr. Bachna, Christine, and I. And then we share that information also with the elementary and secondary leads in order to talk with the principals and follow up where parents have requested follow-up. So we utilize that data to inform where we might need to shore up our services and supports for families. The other thing that we've been talking about are those stay interviews. So why do parents choose to stay in Scottsdale? Because knowing why they're making the choice to stay is as important as why some have chosen to leave. So that's another part of the data that we didn't include because of time, but I think it's important to point out that it's a part of our ongoing effort to meet the needs of our entire school community.
I also hope you enjoy the new notepads and the little
Yes.
stickers.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the fun
We came with
swag.
party favors. All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
And what a party we're having. Let's move on to action items. 5A, approval of guarantee maximum price number 1 of 2 for RFQ 2022-20-26, construction manager at risk, CMAR, services for Pueblo Elementary
I
School.
believe Mr. Rayler's got 100 slides. Shouldn't take him that long.
Super.
Oh, thank you, technology. Good evening, President Sanowski, Vice President Dr. Hartwells, members of the board, Dr. Menzel. Oops, you clicked too fast. I'm actually going to, Jonathan, if you get it back to slide 1 before I get started, please. Thank you. We'll leave it there for a moment, and then as I start talking, we will let that slideshow roll. Looks like we're going to let the slideshow roll regardless. So Just for everyone's knowledge, this slideshow was actually built for our governing board a couple of weeks ago, and I put all the timings in so that they could just simply watch it. And so that's why it's rushing on Jonathan to get to the show. I wanted to just recap a little bit. Pueblo is probably the most unique, not the school, although it is a unique school. It's the most unique construction management process that we have had to encounter since COVID. In that, we brought a JOC number 1 for the electrical and the early purchase of the electrical. Then we brought JOC number 2 for the early purchase of the mechanical. Now we're bringing GMP 1, and a large majority of GMP 1 is also early purchase for this project. The construction documents are not done. They're at 50% right now. And so a large majority of this GMP 1 are estimates, are the contractor's best numbers, working with their trade partners, but they are largely estimates, allowances. One of the conversations that we had a couple years back with the $1.5 million for Kiva that we had set aside as an allowance is how do we watch that? How do we keep track of that? So knowing that we have some very specific things that we need to do to continue to maintain that transparency with our audit, we have retained Arcadis again for Pueblo, and Arcadis is a third-party consulting firm, and they're going to help us watch the financials throughout the Pueblo project. We're going to make sure that as we reconcile documents, as we reconcile the bids here coming up in September, September, that all of those numbers jive. We're moving at a very fast pace, but we're moving at a fast pace for a reason. We don't know where the market's going. We know that there are still ships outside of the shores of China waiting to be loaded, and then they're going to come here. When they're going to be loaded, we don't know. We do know that there are a lot of things. I sent the governing board a memo or an email chain from one of our suppliers that originally the microphones were going to get here on a certain date, and now we're looking at January for those microphones to arrive. So we don't know where the market's going, and so in order to try and manage that risk, we're moving forward with this GMP number 1. McCarthy has done a great job of identifying everything that we're doing. We'll be able to account for every dollar as we go through this process, and we will reconcile as per our audit requirements every subcontractor and every penny that they spent. Thanks to the audit, we have the most complex backup sheets for our pay apps than anyone has ever seen. Core, now coming into Tavon with us, looked at that and just were in amazement. But they're going to have to get into compliance with us as well. So I want it to be clear that this one is different. It's expensive. It's expensive because of COVID. It's expensive because of some of our site conditions. We've got bad soil on the Pueblo site, and we're having to take a lot of soil off, bring a lot of soil on. The site work alone, and that's not part of this GMP number 1, but just for your information, is $5.5 million. And anyone familiar with Pueblo's location, there's this little thing called Indian Bed and Wash that tends to flood. Well, that creates a flood zone beyond Hayden and causes us to do some extra special things to the property in order to get it to be buildable. So now, Jonathan, you can roll slides, and it's going to move faster than I can talk, but we're going to let it just do that. One thing to note is what you're seeing is not the old Cherokee. Well, a couple of my folks looked at it and they're like, Dennis, that looks like Cherokee. It's not Cherokee. We just haven't put the colors on the building. We actually just met with the architects last week, Shelley and I, and much to their dismay, I was not approving 9 different colors on the building. So they're going back to the drawing board a little bit.
The colors on the rocks, right out front?
Yeah, well, the one rock we are going to move to make sure that they have their Pueblo rock. But it's real important for us to be able to manage that building for 50 years, and 9 different colors makes it very difficult to do. But architects like those kinds of things. So they're going to go back to the drawing board a little bit and work with that. But one of the big things that came from the visioning committee was that they wanted color on their campus. So we're going to give them color. We're just not going to give them the rainbow. So GMP1, again, all of these items that are listed are not necessarily bid items. They know the quantities. They've gone through the process. Maybe they've talked to one trade partner and said, hey, where are you at with concrete? Where are you at with steel? They've come up with the numbers. You have to remember that McCarthy is a national firm. So they have numbers from the East Coast to the West Coast. They know what's happening in the industry. And so their numbers, and you can bet that they've got a little bit of extra in there to make sure that we don't come back to say, oh, we missed it by $2 million. So everything, just about everything that we are working on has a long lead item of some kind, whether it's masonry, whether it's the pipe for the fire lines, whether it's the speakers in the classrooms. Everything seems to be dragging behind. And fortunately for us, on Kiva, we bought everything beforehand, and we caught the wave early, and we're getting everything done at Kiva. Now, that's not to say that some things have come slower than others, but we're getting there, and we plan to have Kiva open on time. This one here shows you how bad that site is and the things that we have to do to make that site ready to go. There was plenty of conversation. Do we build it on the north? Do we build it on the south? The site slopes about 2 feet from north to south. If we build it on the south, we would have had to build up 4 feet to get it out of the floodplain. So all of those things matter. So today's GMP, $7,638,689. That is our request. And this line item sheet shows you what all of those things include. Okay. We will make this presentation available to have it on the website and to make sure that people can look at it and provide some feedback if necessary. I had provided it to the board a couple weeks ago to make sure that you had an advanced copy. So in the end, we are projecting at this point this school being $24,570,000. That is an expensive school for us. It will, by and large, be our most expensive school, somewhat because of the site conditions, but mostly because of our situation with COVID. We do have, of that $24 million, 22 of it will come from bond, almost 23, and then 1.6 will come from adjacent ways. We've done adjacent ways on all of our projects, all of the ingress and egress driveways, parking lot, all of that area gets to be paid through adjacent ways. So our bond was passed in 2016, and you can see that nationally from that time, 36% increase. There was no inflationary value assigned to our bond. There's no depositing $40 million and gaining interest on it, that none of that works for us. So what we had in 2016, that's what we're using now. Ultimately, I will bring to you on the June 28th board meeting, what does this mean for the rest of the projects. I will have an item for that. We are working very hard. We brought a project manager on board when Dan Collinsworth left, Mr. Carlos Monreal. He's familiar with the district. He was actually a school facilities board liaison for a couple of years. And we are going to pursue at least $12 million worth of projects from the SFB and relieve our bond funds. So that will be a part of how we ultimately pay for this overage, this expense that we hadn't planned for back in 2015-16. So that's my presentation. I told Shelley 15 minutes, so fire away on questions, please.
Board members, questions? Vice President Dr. Hart-Wells.
This is just it's a comment and a clarification and an underscore. While there are allowances built into this projected GMP number 1.
Yes.
There is an independent third party that is part of this project that will provide oversight to ensure that those allowances aren't gratuitously taken.
Yes.
Thank you. And then thank you for mentioning the School Facilities Board. I was glad to hear that you're considering making requests to the Schools Facility Board, which of course, that's why they are there with our state dollars.
Carlos actually showed me today, he's got a spreadsheet and he's got like a fundraising thermometer. And so every time we get awarded a project, his little fundraising. So he's at 2% right now. He's pretty proud of that because he's only been here for a couple of weeks. But we have already submitted about $10 million worth of work. Now, that's a long process to get that to fruition, but we have every confidence that we're gonna nail that down.
All right, well, welcome to Carlos, and I hope that thermometer goes to boiling. Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Rayler.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Board Member Greenberg?
None. Thank you, Dennis, for another riveting presentation, and I don't think 9 different colors would make a whole lot of sense. But I appreciate you doing this really hard work, especially under these very difficult circumstances. And I think it just reminds us when we go out for the capital override why we need to be clear about what the funds are used for and why we're asking for the amount that we're asking for, because we do need to take into account inflation for all things, not just bond projects, but everything we do.
Thank you for that great comment, Board Member Greenberg. Seeing no more questions, I move to approve 5A, our approval of guaranteed maximum price number 1 of 2 for RFQ 22-20-26.
Second.
And there's a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes 4-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we will move on to 5B, approval for the salary adjustment of the Enterprise Resource Planning System Analyst.
So the description is in the board packet. This really was a matter of, we posted the position. We had 2 people who applied, one that had never even worked with visions before. We assessed the market and decided that we were probably not offering enough in order to attract the talent we need. The position is critically important to the organization, as we can point to examples where failure to have the right data actually cost us money. And so the recommendation is to reclassify the position so that we can get a qualified pool of applicants.
Vice President Dr. Hart-Wells.
Thank you, President Sanowski. Thank you, Dr. Menzel. Could you please remind us that, I don't see the job description here, actually, what the Enterprise Resource Planning System Analyst
So
will do?
this is our visions specialist. So kind of straddles the fence between finance and HR. And I don't know if Shannon or Alexis want to talk about that, but it's a critical data function within the system, and we don't have someone dedicated to that.
Yes, so right now, Visions is the software that we use for our financial, also for our employee management. Really what we're looking for is somebody who can be support. We find ourselves, right now, our Director of Finance is kind of the support person for that program, and she is spending about half of her time just dealing with calls on, hey, this isn't working, or what's new, and how do I get this fixed, or I can't do what I need to do in here. So one, we need to reach, I'd like our Director of Finance to do something that besides spend half of her time dealing with support calls, but also the information in there is critically important to the district and what we're reporting out. And we've just found that we haven't had this type of position in several years. And we need things that are cleaned up and tidied up a little bit more, and somebody who that is their dedicated role is to make sure that what we have is accurate, but also that our employees have the support that they need when they run into issues.
Thank you, Ms. Kroters. So this position was existing, just need to reclassify?
We had just created, it was a position, when we first bought Visions in early 2000s, it was a position that was created back then when we first implemented Visions. It had been eliminated a number of years ago. We came to the board this spring and asked that we recreate the position. We based it off of other school districts' position and what their salary range was, but we just have learned that we don't think that's the right spot for it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was the same question that I had asked previously about, what is this? Yeah. Any other questions, board members? Seeing or hearing none, I would like to make a motion to approve 5B, approval of the salary adjustment of Enterprise Resource Planning System Analyst. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes 4-0. Thank you, Shannon. On to 5C, acceptance of the Lowe's Hometown Grant for Yavapai. I believe Lori Bird and Shannon Crozier are going to work together on that? No? Yes?
Well, we're really excited to be able to share that Lowe's has awarded Yavapai $135,000 for library renovations. Lori and Shannon have worked hard on hammering out the terms of the agreement along with Mr. Rayler and Dr. Perniske.
We're happy to answer questions for you. Usually this is the type of agreement that might go on the consent agenda, but because there's a time constraint tied to the agreement, we are bringing it to you today. It is much needed renovation on the Yavapai Library. We thank Dr. Perniske for being proactive in sourcing some funding for that. And we've gone over the agreement. The budget works, it works with Dennis, and we would really like to get that project done.
Thank you. Governing board members, questions? Vice President Dr. Hartwells?
Thank you, President Sanowski. Ms. Bird, my question is, are there standard legal provisions in the contract?
There are several legal provisions.
Yes.
Which standard legal provisions are you most interested in?
Is the contract fairly standard? Are we looking at prohibitions? Is there something in the contract?
It is an agreement. Remember, it's a grant. So we are accepting their grant. We're accepting their grant money. We're not hiring Lowe's as a vendor really to do anything. We're simply accepting their grant money. So it is a fairly standard grant. If you take our money, here are some things we're going to ask you to do in exchange.
So there are
And so-
deliverables.
They're going to give us the money for a specific project, which is to refurbish the library at Yavapai. Dennis has the specifics, I believe, of exactly what that looks like. Lowe's in and of itself is not responsible for completing the project. They would like some signage. They would like us, for example, to utilize some of their volunteers. If that's appropriate for the project, they ask that we source some of our supplies from them. If that's appropriate for the project and that, if it needed to go out for competitive bid, whatever. But they're actually simply giving us the grant money based on the proposal that was submitted, and we agree to the terms of the agreement in order to access that funding.
We will, part of that agreement does say that we'll report back to Lowe's as to the progress, what we're spending, and how we've spent those funds. So this will actually, even though it's a grant, because it's not a state or federal grant, it'll go into a specific gift account. Yeah, it goes into a gift account within the district for Yavapai. It'll be called out into an account that is just for this project so that we can easily track what we're spending, and then report that back. But the reporting is not, it's basically just tell us how you spent the money. It's not anything that's overly burdensome.
This is much more similar to a gift than it is to a vendor.
Okay, so you're not going to commingle the funds. That makes sense. But in terms of, is there a requirement to spend the funds at Lowe's?
No.
No.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Good questions. Any other questions? Board Member Greenberg, do you have any?
No, I do not. Thank you, though.
Okay. Seeing that there are no more questions, I make a motion to approve the acceptance of 5C, acceptance of Lowe's Hometown Grant for Yavapai. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes 4-0. Thank you. Moving on to personnel action item. This is exciting. Dr. Menzel.
Well, we have a number of items here, and typically this would be on consent, but we have administrators that need to start as soon as possible, and we want to be able to move forward. We have one of those with us here this evening, Mr. Olney, who will be our new COCOPA principal, so thank you for joining us this evening.
Hey.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions, we do have people here ready and able to answer them.
Governing board members, do you have any questions on this personnel action item? Seeing and hearing none, I would like to make a motion to approve 5D personnel action items, 5/12/2022 to 6/9/2022. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes 4-0. And on to 5E, job description. Dr. Menzel.
Okay, this is another situation where we're recommending reinstating a position that we thought we were going to downgrade. We did post for a coordinator of gifted. This is an area where Dr. Benson and I had conversations when she was coming on board, and she had expressed her concerns at the time, and I said, well, let us at least go through the process, see what we can find in terms of potential coordinator candidates, but also looking at the overall organizational structure and the expectation not only of our parents, but our commitment to ensuring that we have robust and vibrant gifted programming within Scottsdale. The recommendation is that we would reinstate a director of gifted programming rather than moving to the coordinator, which is what had been previously contemplated. By approving this, it'll allow us to proceed with the posting and recruiting, hopefully a top-tier group of applicants for that position.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Any questions on this particular item? Seeing and hearing none, at this time I make a motion to approve the job description as discussed for the District of the Director of Gifted and Accelerated Programs. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes 4-0. And we are going to move on to action item 5F, lead security guard work calendar updates. Dr. Menzel.
So the next two items are similar in nature, and they came out of our interest-based negotiation process, and Mr. Rayler can probably speak specifically to this with our Scottsdale Support Professional Group. But we have had a challenge in attracting and retaining talent in the security area, and we have needs that extend 12 months. And so the recommendations for the next two agenda items are to create opportunities for 12-month assignments for these two different classifications.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. Governing board members, any questions? Vice President Dr. Hartwells?
Thank you, President Snowski. I have a clarification to make sure I understand fully. So this request arose out of the IBN. Are the current, in this case, the security guard is where we're at here, are comfortable with this 12-month commitment, or is this to offer new?
It's not all. So it's one per high school. And so we approach, I don't know if James wants to speak to this. I think we approached the lead at each site and started there. But there had been some conversation in advance. I don't know if all of them wanted 12 months, but I think we have one per campus.
Madam President and Dr. Hartwells, We have 4 of our 5 leads that have said that they would be agreeable to doing this. One of the leads at Chaparral is choosing to stay in a 9-month position.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dora. I just wanted to make sure that we had consulted and there was an actual interest in doing this. Thank you very much.
So I have a question about that particular position. It'll be 12 months, and per learning complex, will that person rove around, or will they stay focused at the high school level?
They'll primarily stay focused at the high school level.
Okay, and
There's
then
enough
at Chaparral, what will happen over the summertime?
We'll open that 12-month position up to another one of the Chaparral employees. So it wouldn't be the lead that's not interested in it, but we will open that up to one of the other employees. So they'll
For
still
that
have.
gap time?
Yes.
The 3 months, okay.
they'll
So it's
still
not
have
like
the
we're
12
looking
months.
because they're not interested in a 12-month, we're not going to replace that current 9-month employee?
Correct.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. Any other questions? Board Member Greenberg?
Nope.
Okay, seeing that we have no more questions, I make a motion to approve 5F, lead security guard work calendar update. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes 4-0. Thanks. Okay, we're going to move on to our last action item, auditorium technician work calendar update. Dr. Menzel?
Same kind of scenario. The work needs to happen in the summer, but we didn't have a calendar that allowed for that to transpire. And again, this request surfaced out of IBN.
And this position, actually, the auditorium technician work, district-wide is kind of a new thing for a district anyway, and I know it is very necessary, because that is when the work can get done to improve our facilities and make the necessary updates that we've learned about throughout the school year. Are there other questions or comments? Vice President Dr. Harwells?
Thank you. Same question. There's interest in existing employees transitioning to 12 months?
Mr. Rayler will answer that question.
President Sanowski, Dr. Hartwells, there's Todd Stover and Holly Brazen that are on the payroll now, and they would very much like to become 12-month employees.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Rayler.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing and hearing none, at this time I make a motion to approve 5G auditorium technician work calendar updates. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes 4-0. At this time, I move to adjourn this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District Governing Board, June 14th. The time is 9:26 p.m. Is there a second?
Second.
And all in favor of adjourning, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.